Добрый вечер, уважаемые.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, dear friends, dear guests and members of the Valdai Club. I'm pleased to welcome you at this closing session of the 18th annual meeting of the International Valdai Discussion Club. And of course, it gives me great pleasure to invite our most distinguished guest to the stage, President Vladimir Putin of Russia.
Здравствуйте, Владимир Владимирович.
Good evening, Mr. President. We're very glad to have you once again and to see you in person because last year, due to the consequences all too well known to you, we had a very good conversation, but remotely right now, life is getting back on track. This year, our session has been very interesting, very energetic and vibrant. I think people miss live discussions about relevant issues of today, and we didn't expect that. But, of course, we understand that international politics is very important to discuss, but this is not the most important thing right now. Yes, it's changing, but the pandemic has not overturned it. But the same does not go for how people live, how relationships are built between people, states, and societies. And there have been some fundamental shifts here, and it's been like a thread going through all our discussion. And I think we'll have a chance to talk about that. But for now, I would like to give the floor to you to address the audience. Distinguished participants of the plenary session, ladies, gentlemen, from the outset, I would like to thank you for coming to Russia and for taking part in the events organized by the Valdai Club. As is tradition, during these meetings, you raise acute, burning issues of today. And you discuss comprehensively issues that are relevant to people across all countries of the world. This year, the forum's main theme has been formulated very straightforward, bluntly even, global shake-up, 2021, the individual values and the state. Indeed, we live in the time of fundamental shifts. And as is tradition, if you'll permit me, I will speak and share my views on the agenda that you have formulated. These words live during the times of change. It seems somewhat trivial because we cite it so often, but this era goes back quite some time, and this state of fluidity has become something customary. So do we need to emphasize that or not? And I think that I agree with those who've come up with this agenda for this year's forum. I think it's worth doing that. Over the recent decades, many people have quoted the Chinese proverb. The Chinese people is very wise. They have great thinkers and great valuable thoughts we have to keep in mind. And one of them is, God forbid that we should live in the time of change. And we live during these times of change, whether we want that or not. And these changes are becoming increasingly fundamental, increasingly tectonic. And let's cite another thing coming to us from China, another piece of wisdom. The word crisis in Chinese, I think there are many people from China here, and if I'm wrong, they will correct me, but as far as I understand, crisis in Chinese consists of two hieroglyphics. The one stands for danger and the other for opportunity. And we say in Russia, you've got to be clever about fighting the difficulties, and when you fight the danger, you've got to use your experience. And we have to realize the danger that we are up against, and we have to oppose it. And there are different dangers, and they are multifaceted. And there is another component to the crisis, namely opportunities, opportunities that are not to be missed, that have to be seized. especially because this crisis we are up against is of a conceptual nature, of civilizational nature. It is a crisis of approaches, of principles that underlie the very existence of humanity on Earth. And one way or another, we will have to have a very serious think about all of that. And we need to understand what we have to renounce, what we have to revisit, what we have to adjust. And I'm confident that genuine values have to be fought for, and we've got to defend them with everything we've got. Humanity has entered into a new era, and it happened more than 3 decades ago when the main conditions were in place to put an end to the military, political, and ideological confrontation. I think you've talked about that, and our foreign minister spoke about these themes too, but some things I will have to reiterate. Back then, a quest was started for a new balance, a new equilibrium, new conditions in social, political, economic, cultural, and military fields. There was a search for a foundation for a new world system. So far, we failed to grasp it. And those who felt that they were victors after the Cold War, and we said that on many occasions, and they felt after climbing the Olympus that they were losing the ground under their feet. And however beautiful the moment was, you say, linger on, the art so fair, you cannot make it stop and linger. And this changeability is ever present, this transit is never ceasing, and it seems we should have adapted to it, but so far we failed to do that. And this transformation that we see is of a different magnitude than the ones humanity faced in the past. It's not just a shift in the balance of power or scientific and technological breakthrough, even though these things are happening right now. What we encounter right now is systemic changes that go in parallel in all directions, in all dimensions. The geological, the geophysical state of our planet is changing, and we have increasingly paradoxical interpretations of humanity is and what its raison d'etre is. Let's have a look around. Let me share some thoughts with you, thoughts that I cherish. First, the environment are so evident that even the most careless people and laymen cannot simply dismiss them. We could have scientific discussions about the mechanisms behind these processes, but we see that these processes are deteriorating and something has to be done about it. Natural catastrophes such as droughts, floods, hurricanes, and tsunami have become all but a norm. Suffice it to remember the tragic, devastating floods in Europe this summer, or the wildfires in Siberia, but elsewhere too. We saw the wildfires in Turkey, in the US, and in the American continent. Any geopolitical, any scientific, technological, and ideological competition becomes almost senseless amid such conditions if the victor of such a competition will have nothing to breathe or nothing to sate their thirst. The coronavirus pandemic has become yet another reminder of how fragile our community is, how vulnerable it is. The main objective is to ensure safety and security of man and its stress resilience. In order to have greater chances of surviving the catastrophes, we need to revisit how we organize our life, our housing, how cities have to develop, what the objectives or the priorities of economic development are for whole countries. And security is one of the imperatives, one of the peremptory norms, and I dare anyone try to contest that. And then they will have to explain why they turned out to be not ready for crises and shake-ups. Secondly, social and economic problems humanity is facing have exacerbated to an extent that right now we see terrible consequences. And right now everyone says that the current capitalism model, which underlies social structure in the overwhelming majority of countries, has run its course, and there is no escaping the entanglement of controversies within the current model. Even in the richest countries and regions, we see a growing inequality of material benefits and also inequality of opportunities within societies and at the international level too. And I spoke about this most important challenge when I spoke at the Davos Forum earlier this year. And of course, all of these issues are fraught with deep social rifts. In a number of countries, in a number of regions, people are facing a crisis of food. We'll probably get back to that, but there are grounds to believe that this crisis is only going to exacerbate, and it can take extreme forms. There's also the lack of potable water and electricity, and I think we'll get back to that as well, let alone such issues as poverty, high level of unemployment, as well as lack of proper health care. And countries that are lagging behind realize these issues very acutely. They despair of having a chance to catch up to the leaders. And this frustration is fueling aggression, pushing them into the ranks of extremists, and people who live in these countries feel frustration because their expectations have been disappointed. They feel that they have no prospects, not themselves, not just themselves, but also their children. And this leads to a quest for a better life, for uncontrolled migration, which in turn creates conditions for social discontent in countries and better off countries. I don't need to explain anything to you because you understand that and you probably know all of that better than I do. And also there are other acute social issues, challenges and risks in better off countries, in leading countries. And right now, this fight for influence is being relegated to the background because you've got to address your own problems first. And sometimes we see this blunt, aggressive reaction of society, especially young people, against the measures aimed at coronavirus. And we see that the infection has become but a trigger, whereas the roots of social discontent run far deeper. The pandemic of coronavirus was supposed to consolidate people in the fight against this great threat of the utmost magnitude, but instead it became a divisive factor. There are many reasons to explain that, but the most important issue is that people tend to traditional models which do not work, or to be more precise, they work, but very often they produce the obverse effect. Sometimes they lead to a worsening of the situation instead of improving it. On many occasions, Russia has come up with a call to put aside the ambitions there is no place for in this world and to work together. I believe we'll talk about that later. Let's talk about the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. Well, I'm not talking about the sanctions against Russia, but you know that sanctions persist even against countries that are in dire need of international aid, and these sanctions are still there. These restrictive measures are still in place. And what about principles of humanism that underline the Western political thought? In reality, it turns out to be nothing but blah, blah. Well, that's what we see when we look at it. Third, there is a technological revolution. We see great achievements and accomplishments in AI, power generation, communication, genetics, bioengineering, medicine, and they open up colossal information, but they also raise applied issues, spiritual, philosophical, moral, which only sci-fi writers were concerned in the past. When the technology will become better at thinking than human being, to what extent can we interfere into the human organism before humanity ceases to be themselves and turn into something else? What are the ethical boundaries in the world where science and technology have no bounds? And what will it entail for our successors and descendants, our children and grandchildren? And these changes are gaining momentum, and they're impossible to stop because these is an objective reality, and we'll have to respond to these changes, and all will have to do that regardless of your political regime, economic state, or prevailing ideology. Well, as far as words go, all countries say that they are committed to the ideals of cooperation, of working together against common issues, but that is just what the words say. In reality, something else happens. And as I said, the pandemic has all but pushed forth and spurred on negative trends that came to the foreground a long time ago. Everyone is out for themselves, and this is a principle that has become the new norm, and some even boast of that, and selfish interests have prevailed over the common good. And this is not about the ill will of elites or some countries. Everything is far more complex and complicated. The world is not black and white. Every government, every leader are first and foremost accountable to their compatriots, their citizens. They need to ensure their security, safety, and welfare. That is why international transboundary themes will never have the same importance for the leadership of a country that internal stability has. And this is normal. This is the right thing to do. And we have to admit that world governance institutions are never as efficient as they need to be. They're not up to the task as far as the dynamics of global processes goes. And the pandemic has been a huge help in that, because it showed what institutions have potential and what needs a readjustment. And right now, we are up for a realignment of the world system, because the shares will have to be redistributed between growing, developing countries that felt left aside in the past. And right now, it's no longer the West that is dominated in the world affairs. Right now, it was but a short period of time. Right now, everything is far more diverse and diversified. We see a transformation. It's not mechanical. It's a unique process. And the political history has not known any examples when a stable world order emerged without a big war, not based on its outcomes, as it happened after the Second World War. So we have a chance to create a very good, benignant precedent, because we know that this attempt after the end of the Cold War, based on the West's domination, failed. And the current world order is a byproduct of that failure, and we have to learn the lesson. So what is the outcome we have arrived at? For 2 decades, the most powerful country in the world was engaged in military campaigns in 2 countries that were incomparable to it under any parameter. As a result, the country had to wind down its operation without achieving the objectives that it set forth 20 years ago. They had to withdraw from these countries, suffering and having dealt an important damage to others too. And the situation has worsened drastically. But it's not just about that. In the past, when a war was lost by one country, the other emerged victorious, and this victorious power assumed the responsibility. So the failure of the U.S. in Vietnam did not lead to Vietnam turning into a black hole. No. We saw a statehood emerge in Vietnam. It was relying on the support of a powerful ally. But right now, everything is different. Whoever is on top, the war never ceases. It only changes its form. And the alleged victor either doesn't want or simply cannot ensure peace building, peace rehabilitation. It only exacerbates the chaos and leaves vacuum. That is very dangerous. Colleagues, what are the starting points for this complicated process for the world realignment? Let me just succinctly share these thoughts with you. First, the coronavirus pandemic has showed that only a state can act as an element that gives structure to the world order. And the recent developments have shown that the attempts of global digital platforms, however powerful they are, we see testimonies to that. So these attempts to usurp political or state functions have failed. These are nothing but ephemeral attempts. And even the US has shown the place to the masters of these digital platforms, and the same is happening in Europe. If you look at the fines against these companies, if you see the measures undertaken to demonopolize the market, you know about that. Over the last decades, many have been putting forth loud concepts proclaiming the outdatedness of the role of states. It was said that amid globalization, national boundaries became an anachronism, whereas a sovereignty was a barrier to prosperity. But you know, I said that, and I would like to say that once again. It was said by those who relied on their competitive edges and wanted to open up borders of our countries. But when it turns out that there are others who can be more successful, these forces get back to shutting down their borders and closing them off to others. They are building walls. Don't we see that? Everyone says that, and everyone understands what's happening perfectly. And there is, no point in contesting that fact. It's evident. But when there was talk about the need to open up the borders, we saw that the development took a different turn, because only a sovereign state can efficiently respond to the challenges of time and to the requests of its citizens. And that is why a working international order has to take into account the interests and opportunities and capabilities of countries, instead of trying to say that it should not be the case. And of course, no one should try to obtrude anything on others, be that principles of social and political regime or values that are proclaimed as universals. Because when we see a true crisis, there is only one universal value, and that is the value of human life. And how to protect that? Every state gives a response of its own based on its capabilities, culture, and tradition. And let me say a couple of words about the danger and the magnitude of the pandemic. As we know, the pandemic has claimed so far the lives of more than 4,900,000 people. These are terrible figures that are superior to military losses of the countries that participated in the First World War. Another thing I would like to say is that the magnitude of changes is requiring that we all should be cautious, at least out of self-preservation, because quality shifts in technology, drastic changes in the environment, the overturning of the traditional regime do not mean that society and state have to respond in a drastic manner. We know in Russia all too well from experience, unfortunately, multiple experiences, that it's easier to destroy than to build. A little more than 100 years ago, Russia was undergoing through difficult times because of the First World War, but these problems were not bigger than those other countries were experiencing. Maybe those problems were not as acute as in other countries, and Russia was capable of overcoming these problems. But unfortunately, the revolutionary changes led to a collapse, to a disintegration of a big country. And the same story happened 30 years ago when a potentially powerful power did not embark on the path of necessary flexible transformations that were required. As a result, it fell victim to dogmatists of different kinds, reactionaries and progressionists. Everyone did their part. And this gives us a grounds to say that revolution is not a way out of a crisis. On the contrary, the revolution only exacerbates crises. Not a single revolution was ever worth the loss that it dealt, the blow, the damage that it dealt to human potential. Now the world is becoming very fragile, and we need a pillar, a foundation, moral, ethical, value foundation. And values are a byproduct of cultural and historical development of every country, of every nation. And this intertwining of nations enriches those values, allows us a chance to look at a different angle at our own tradition. But this process has to be organic. It should never be rapid, because everything that is alien will be dismissed, and abruptly any attempts at a value diktat can create the result that is adverse to the desirable one. We see with bemusement the processes unfolding in countries that have grown accustomed to viewing themselves as the flagships of progress. Of course, it's none of our business what is happening. The social and cultural shocks that are happening in some countries, in the Western countries, some believe that aggressive blotting out of whole pages of your own history, the affirmative action in the interest of minorities, and the requirement to renounce the traditional interpretation of such basic values as mother, father, family, and the distinction between sexes are a milestone towards a renewal of society. It's their right. They can do that if they want to. We're not trying to meddle into that, but we have a different point of view. We believe, at least the overwhelming majority of Russian society, that should be more precise, believe that we need to rely on our own spiritual values, on our historical traditions, on the culture of our multi-ethnic nation. The proponents of the so-called social progress believe that they are bringing a new conscience, a new consciousness to humanity, something that is more correct. But we're not the ones to judge. Let them do that if they want to. But there is one thing I would like to say. The recipes they come up with are nothing new. Paradoxical as it may seem, but this is something we saw in Russia. It happened in our country before. After the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks followed the dogmas of Marx and Engels, and they also declared that they were going to change the traditional lifestyle, the political, the economic lifestyle, as well as the very notion of morality, the basic principles for a healthy society. They were trying to destroy age and century-long values, revisiting the relationship between people. They were encouraging, informing on one's own beloved and families. It was hailed as the march of progress, and it was very popular across the world, and it was supported by many, as we see it is happening right now. Incidentally, the Bolsheviks were absolutely intolerant of other opinions, different from their own. And I think this should remind you of something that is happening. And we see what is happening in the Western countries. It is with puzzlement that we see the practices Russia used to have and that we left behind in distant past. The fight for equality and against discrimination turns into an aggressive dogmatism on the brink of absurdity when great authors of the past, such as Shakespeare, are no longer taught in schools and universities because they are announced as backward classics that did not understand the importance of gender or race. In Hollywood, there are leaflets reminding what you should do in the cinema, in the films, how many personalities and actors you've got, what kind of color, what sex, and sometimes it's even tighter and stricter than what the Department of Propaganda of the Soviet Communist Party Central Committee did. And the fight against racism, which is a lofty goal, turns into new culture, cancel culture, and into reverse discrimination, racism on the obverse. And it brings people apart, whereas the true fighters for civic rights, they were trying to eliminate those differences. I asked my colleagues to find this quote from Martin Luther King, and he said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." That is a true value. But I'm afraid this is not what we see in reality right now. Incidentally, in Russia, most of our countries simply do not care what skin color you have. He or she, that's not that important, because each and every one of us is a human person, human being. That's the most important thing. We see phantasmagoria brought about by this discussion in the Western countries about the rights of men and women. You know, the Bolsheviks were speaking about nationalizing not just the property, but also women. The proponents of new approaches go so far as they want to eliminate the whole notions of men and women. And those who dare say that men and women exist, and this is a biological fact, they are all but banished. Parent number 1, parent number 2, or the parent that has given birth, or instead of breast milk, you say human milk. And you say all of that so that people who are not sure of their sex or gender are not unhappy. And I would like to say that this is not something new. In the 1920s, the Soviet Kulturträger came up with the so-called newspeak, and they thought that thereby they were building a new consciousness and coming up with new values. And they went so far that we feel the consequences up until now. There are some monstrous things when, from a very young age, you teach to children that a boy can easily become a girl, and you impose on them this selection, this choice. You push the parents aside and make the child take these decisions that can destroy their lives. And if we call the spade a spade, this is nigh to a crime against humanity, and all of that under the banner of progress. Well, some people just want to do that. In the past, I said that when formulating our approaches, we will be guided by the ideology of healthy conservatism, as it happened several years ago when the situation and the world arena was not as tense as it is right now, but the clouds were already on the horizon. And right now, the world is undergoing through structural shifts. And right now, this healthy, sensible conservatism as a political course has become increasingly important, especially amid the growing number of risks and dangers and the fragility of reality around us. The conservative approach is not reactionary. It's not fear of any change. It's not trying to preserve the status quo. It's about relying on time-tested tradition, on preserving and multiplying our legacy, our heirloom, and also realism in assessing yourself and others. This is about an accurate system of priorities, understanding what's necessary and what's possible. It's about rejection of extremism as a method of work. And we do not know when this world realignment will end. And until it ends, until the world realigns, we have to stick to this conservatism, because we have to remember this medical principle: do no harm, noli nocere, as it goes in Latin. And we believe this is the most sensible choice so far. And I would like to say that for Russia, these are not just theoretical constructs. These are lessons that we learned from our tragic history. We know that the price of social experimentation sometimes is too high, it's exorbitant. These social experiments can destroy material and spiritual pillars of human existence, leaving nothing but moral ruins that can give ground to no new construction. And last but not least, without a close international cooperation, it's impossible to address the most acute problems. And we've got to be realists. We know that most beautiful slogans about the global solution to global issues that we've listened to since the 20th century, they will never come to pass because such global solutions require such a big transfer of sovereign rights of states and nations to supranational structures that I do not think anyone is willing to go that far. And besides, politicians are accountable not to global community, which is a very vague concept, but to their citizens, to their voters. But this does not mean that we cannot somewhat limit ourselves to give a global response to universal challenges, because a global challenge is a challenge to everyone and to all at once. And of course, if everyone sees that they will benefit from cooperation and working together to overcome these challenges, everyone is going to be willing to do that. And to stimulate that, we could probably come up with a roster of challenges and dangers under the UN auspices for concrete countries and for potential consequences. And we need to engage experts from different countries and from different scientific disciplines to participate in this process, in this drafting, and you in particular, distinguished colleagues. We believe that such a roadmap could encourage many countries to have a new look at world problems and to see what kind of benefit they stand to get from this cooperation. I mentioned the issues of international institutions. Unfortunately, this fact is becoming increasingly obvious. A reform or abolishment of a number of these organizations are on the agenda, but the most important institution is the UN, and it still remains a peremptory value. I believe that amid the turbulence of today's world, the UN is the carrier of this healthy conservatism in international relations that we need to normalize the situation. The organization is often criticized because it is not fast enough to adapt to ever-changing circumstances. Well, it's justified to an extent, but the blame is not on the organization itself, but also on its participants. This is an international structure that carries norms and the very spirit of norm production. It's based on equality. It takes into account the opinion of each and everyone, and we need to create and preserve this heritage. Yes, we've got to reform the organization, but we should not throw away the baby out with the bathwater. And on many occasions, I spoke from a high podium and from Valdai too, because Valdai is a very authoritative platform, colleagues. We have to recognize that. And I spoke many times, and the problems are piling up. They become increasingly explosive, so we need to work together. So once again, I would like to take this opportunity to say that we are willing, we are ready to work together to address the most acute common issues. Distinguished colleagues, the changes that we've spoken today and that we discussed before this plenary session concern all nations, all peoples, and Russia is no exception. Just as the rest of us, we are searching for a response, a solution to the most acute challenges of today, and there are no ready-made recipes, but I'll go as far as to say that our country has a competitive edge. And that competitive edge consists in our historic experience. And I spoke about that on many occasions throughout my today's remarks. And I had to remind you of many negative lessons that we learned in the past. But our country has come up with a collective immunity to extremism that leads to shocks, social and political collapses. People highly value stability as well as a chance to develop steadily. They like this confidence that their plans, their hopes will not come down crashing because of careless aspirations of a new batch of revolutionaries. We still remember all too well what happened 3 decades ago and how long it took us to climb out of this hole that we found ourselves in after the dissolution of the USSR. And our conservatism is that of optimists, and we believe that a steady, stable development is possible. But of course, it comes down to us, to our own efforts, and we are willing to work with our partners for these lofty ideas. I would like to thank all the participants once again, and as is tradition, I will be glad to take your questions. Well, I'll try to answer your questions. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Владимир.
Thank you very much, Mr. Putin, for such a lengthy presentation regarding the current and outstanding issues and some core issues as well. I cannot but ask you, in the wake of your words, on several times you've said about the historical experience, conservatism, healthy conservatism and traditions. Are you not afraid of unhealthy conservatism? Where is the border between that when traditions become a burden? Well, anything can be turned into a burden if you are not careful enough. But when I speak about healthy conservatism, I recall Nikolai Berdayev, whom I've mentioned on numerous occasions. This is our well-known philosopher who was expelled from the Soviet Union in 1922. He strived into the future. He stood for conservatism as well, and probably I will not quote him fully, but conservatism is not that something that allows us to move forward, but this is something that prevents from moving backwards to chaos. If this is how we will view conservatism, this will help us think about the development and move forward. If we speak about traditions and traditional values, which is the topic that you broach quite often, so you suggest that traditional values should be something that bring the world together, but traditions are unique. How can we come close based on similar traditions? Well, you know, there is indeed identity and uniqueness. Different peoples feature that, but there is something that brings us together. We are all human beings and we want to live, and this value is absolute. And the same is true for the family values, because this is about the continuation. Do we want to live? Do we want to exist or not? If we don't, well, okay. It is very important to adapt the value, to adopt children, but for a child to be adopted, someone should give birth to him or her. This is the second very important value, and there are many others. You are very intelligent people here, so you understand it very well. So based on these common values, we should build something that we can work on. Okay, good. You said quite a strong phrase that the current capitalism has exhausted itself. Many people think like that as well, but you turn to the deplorable experience of the 20th century, and we rejected capitalism, but it led us to no good. So where are we moving from that capitalist scheme? Well, I have already said that there are no ready recipes. So what we can see now at energy markets, for example, this is actually the manifestation of the capitalism which does not work. The market can regulate itself, but, well, 1,500 US dollars for 1,000 cubic meter of gas. How can it regulate itself? When everything is stable, when everything is fine, almost all economies of the world the participants of economic activities require more freedoms and states less participation in the economy, but only when actors face difficulties, global difficulties, everyone asks for the states to interfere. I can remember it very well when in 2008, 2009, when we faced the global financial crisis. I was the head of the government at that time, and I spoke to many successful entrepreneurs, and they were ready to give their companies only for 1 ruble, although it cost millions of US dollars. Why was that? They had to assume responsibility for the future of their enterprises, and it was easier for them to retain what they had already got, but shift responsibility onto others. And then we agreed that the state will lend a hand and assume some responsibility. We managed to find a solution together with entrepreneurs, and as a result, biggest private companies were bailed out, and the state got money as a result. Because when they found themselves in good conditions, when they managed to get afloat once again, the state got the revenues. Probably it is here that we can find common solutions, and we can adopt the experience of other countries of this partnership between the state and the private sector. And China is a good case in point, because the Communist Party has a leading role, but still the institutions, economic ones, function very effectively. This is quite evident. There is no ready recipe, and the capitalism does not work, and I have provided some examples of that. You know, it resembles art. You know? Yes, it is. Indeed it does, and we should feel at what period of time we need to take advantage of that, whether to put more salt or sugar in that, being guided by the common principles that we look at when financial institutions like the OECD or the IMF come up with them. So we should look at them. And where are we? So we look at them and come up with plans, and this is how we should do. By the way, over the past years, when we have tried to adverse the negative effects of the pandemic, we've managed to do that indeed, and we can see that other countries have shown good results as well. It seems that we have been building the optimism of conservatism. You know, we should build social welfare states, actually, like Europe has been doing, and for us it's very important as well. Here I'm speaking about the difference in the incomes of our citizens, but it is not only our problem. And just look at the situation in Europe, in the United States. There is a gap as well, and the main benefits went to those people who were already well off, and they have become only richer, unlike the middle class and the people with the lowest income. In the United States, it is very evident, and in Europe, this is a little bit less obvious. And the last question from me then. You have said about the UN's valuable role in the international relations. Well, it is quite clear, although many have criticized it, and your counterpart, Mr. Erdogan, said the other day that the United Nations Security Council should be taken away because the group of Victoria states monopolized the power. Do you agree with that? No, I don't. He has come recently to Russia and we have met. I have looked through his ideas. I agree with some points that he has made, but still, well, it is clear why he says this. He believes, it seems, that Turkey could have also become a UNSC permanent member state, but it's not Russia that has to decide. It should be a consensus decision. And we have India, we have South Africa. This is quite a fair thing to do. The most important thing is to strike a balance. There can be different solutions of this problem. I'm not going to jump ahead and tell you about Russia's position. But what is important here, and I have pointed this out in my introductory remarks, and I said that to Mr. Erdogan, well, if we destroy the veto right, the United Nations would die the same day. It would turn into the League of Nations. This will be just the venue for a discussion. It will be Valdai Club number 2. But the Valdai Club number 1 is here, and Valdai Club number 2 will be in New York. Well, we are ready to reply. I said, yeah. Well, this is the point, actually. We do not want to change anything. Well, we do need to change, but we do not want to destroy the foundation. This is actually the basis of the UN. There are 5 permanent member states having veto rights in the United Nations Security Council. There are other states which are non-permanent members, but we should think about making the organization more balanced, because indeed it is true. And in this vein, Mr. Erdogan is right. United Nations appeared after World War II, and there have been some changes in the power balance as well, and we know that very well. In terms of purchasing power parity, China is ahead of the United States. What is that? This is actually the global change. And what about India? There are 1,500,000,000 people there. Where is Latin America? Where is Africa? Brazil is a giant economy. We should think about that as well. We should discuss these things, but we should not rush in. We should not make mistakes while reforming the organization. Well, the Valdai Club leadership will consider this issue, will consider conducting sessions in New York. I'm afraid about visas. We will have problems with that, I think. Well, you know, probably if it is the head of state level, then it's okay. We can ask Mr. Lavrov to speak about that with his counterparts. Well, yeah, indeed, we can hold Valdai Club meetings abroad at some other venues. It could be interesting. There are well-known, famous analysts, experts here coming from different countries, so we can involve others who could join these discussions in the hosting country. I think it's very good. So we have a goal ahead of us. So, dear friends, feel free to ask questions. Is it a goal? Well, it's not a goal, it's an opportunity. It's just like a crisis. Could you please take your mic? Mr. Putin, I would like to quote your words. You said that Russia should draw upon the Russian values. This is what we said at the Valdai Club meeting yesterday. I would like to ask you, which Russian anthropologists, ethnologists, and writers are closest to you? so that we would be able to understand what values you have stuck to. You know, I do not want to say that it's, for example, Ivan Ilyin. Yes, I do read his books. I have his book on the shelf, and I take it and read it. I have mentioned Mr. Valdai as well. There are other Russian philosophers. These are the people who have thought about Russia and about its future. We should take into account the time when they worked. But still, I'm very interested in what they thought and the way of thinking. There is a well-known idea of passionality of nations. This is quite interesting. We can argue about that, and the dispute is still going on. But if these ideas cause disputes, it means that these ideas remain interesting. I will remind you about the passionality. The author believes that nations and peoples and ethnicities are born like a living organism, then they go up to the climax, and then they become older. But in many countries, like on the African continent, today's Europe is called the continent that is becoming old. Is it true or not? It is hard to say, but the idea that inside a nation there should be a driver for development, a will to develop, and I believe it has some grounds and some basis for existence. And we can see that some countries are developing very fast, improving, although there are some outstanding issues. It's like a volcano, like on that Spanish islands with lava going up, and there are other volcanoes that have already died with only birds singing above. Mr. Putin, you've mentioned Lev Gumilov. And in 1979, I got his first book that was published at that period of time by himself. Yes, indeed, that was a tradition. So, dear friends, please introduce yourself and you take the floor. Alexei Miller. Good afternoon, Mr. Putin. Alexei Miller, historian, the European University of St. Petersburg. So we have two Alexei Millers. This is how rich the Russia is. Well, 2 years ago, you were asked at a Valdai Club meeting about the resolution of the European Parliament, which said that Russia and the Soviet Union had the same responsibility for the breakout of the Second World War, like the fascist Germany, and you have flagged up that on numerous occasions. And when you unveiled the monument to the survivors, to the victims of the Leningrad siege, you said that P5 leaders should meet so that we would get rid of these ideas of the war of memories. But we unfortunately didn't move far. Are there any changes for the better? Could you please say a few words about that? And there is a second question. So, well, when we face this confrontation inside the countries involved in this war of memory, there is a high temptation to limit to a certain extent the freedom of discussions of historians, and such discussions imply differences of opinions. Some ideas and points of view cannot be quite right. And is there a threat to Russia in this regard? Is there going to be some limitation to the freedom? No, I do not think we are facing this threat. People sometimes do not take responsibility for what they say, but this is like the reverse of the medal. If you talk about my initiative to convene the meeting of the P5 leaders, well, it has been supported by all the leaders of the permanent member states of the United Nations Security Council. Other problems emerged related to the differences inside the P5. They are not about Russia. And then we had this pandemic of COVID-19, and it became more complicated. But there were positive views of the meeting. Hopefully, it will take place sometime. It will be for the better. It will be useful. We have been discussing it with our U.S. partners, our Chinese friends, and the French as well. By the way, the French president supported this idea straight away. And the United Kingdom as well. There are ideas about the content, the details of the meeting, but the idea has been supported by and large. And hopefully we will hold the meeting if everything is fine. As for the historical memory in general and the historical memory related to World War II, you know, I'm ready to speak about that myself and provide reasoning. We have some claims against the leaders of the country that existed since 1917 to 1990, but we should not liken the Nazis and communists ahead of World War II and divide responsibility in a 50-50 basis. It is a lie, and I'm saying this not just because I'm a Russian and I'm the leader of Russia, and Russia is a successor to the Soviet Union. I'm saying to you as a historian, I have read the archives. We have been publishing many of documents of those times, and when I read, I changed my views about that. And we have something to blame Stalin for the concentration camps and many other bad things, but the Soviet government did its utmost to prevent the beginning of World War II.
Кто-то может сказать, что не были готовы.
And some would say that they were not ready for that, and that is why they were trying to prevent it from happening. But they did try. They were also fighting for preserving Czechoslovakia, and they are also raising the issue of protecting the country's sovereignty. It's no secret. You know, we're opening up the archives right now, and we read about the reaction of France to the then developments, in particular with regard to the Munich meeting with Hitler, when the leading European politicians met with him in 1938. When you read that, you see, of course, attempts at distorting the events can happen, they always happen, but you need to read the documents in order to make an informed decision. There are discussions about what happened in 1939, and when you say just look at what happened a little before that, you participated in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia together with the Germans. You were the ones who set the spark to the powder keg. I read the archive documents that ended up in Russia after the Red Army swept through Europe. Those were French, German documents. So it was basically an agreement on partition in Czechoslovakia, an agreement on when the troops were to be introduced into the country. And then they're trying to shift all the blame on the Soviet Union. But it's just not true. It doesn't fit the realities, nor the truth, nor the facts. So who was the aggressor? Who was the one who started the war? Was it the Soviet Union that started a war on Germany? No. Yes, there were these secret agreements between Germany and the Soviet Union. Incidentally, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the Soviet troops entered Brest when the Germans were already stationed there. The latter just moved a little bit and the Soviets came in. So we have to have a very calm, informed discussion with reference to documents. No one is blaming the then Polish leadership, but we cannot allow that such blame is placed on the Soviet leadership either. Besides, on June the 22nd, 1941, Germany attacked the Soviet Union, and let's not forget who stormed Berlin. That was not the Germans nor Americans, not the British, nor the French, nor the Americans. It was the Red Army. And no one should forget about that. And it's an undeniable fact. 1,100,000 people died around Stalingrad. The UK losses stood at 400,000, less than 500,000 in the US. 80% of the Wehrmacht was destroyed by the Red Army of the Soviet Union. Did you forget about that? Well, no. No one forgot anything. It's just there are some who are trying to use these developments of the past, the events of the past, to address the short-term issues of today. And this is bad, because such manipulation of history never leads to anything good. Well, at least it never leads to mutual understanding. Yes, Arietta Moscatelli, please. Arietta Moscatelli, Italy. Thank you very much for this meeting. You said that it's 30 years since the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and there's been a lot of talk about the so-called Homo Sovieticus, whether such a man, such a human, existed. So my question is, do you think there was this Homo Sovieticus? Does it exist in reality? Do you think Russia has entirely overcome the Soviet social experience? And if you don't mind, I would like to ask you, what remains as a legacy from the Soviet time in your life? Many people of my generation, at least, remember this formula, a new community of Soviet people, Soviet individual. We remember that very well. And there's nothing bad about this formula per se. But then, you know, the whole world, the US, they're saying that the US is a melting pot where people of different nationalities, different religions, different ethnic groups are melting and mingling together. And there's nothing bad about that. The Irish, the people originating from Europe, from Eastern Europe, from wherever who come, Latin Americans, the Africans, those who originated in these countries and these continents, they come together and they are proud to be US citizens. And that's wonderful, this melting pot. But Russia is a melting pot too. from the very moment when a unified Russian state was created. I think the first steps to do that date back to the 8th century, the 9th century. After the baptism of Rus, a Russian nation started to emerge, as well as a centralized Russian state based on a common market, shared language, the authority of the prince, as well as shared spiritual values. And then the Russian state, after being formed, started to expand, turning into a melting pot in its own right. And there was nothing new in principle that was created in the USSR, apart from this one single thing, this new community, these Soviet people. It took on an ideological flair. And that's not good because it limits the possibilities. Secondly, the Soviet people felt and bore the positive elements of what was happening. They took on such values as patriotism, as the primacy of spiritual, of material values, such values as family values. But there were some negative elements too that made their way into their psyche. Soviet people were devoid and robbed of property. They had no individual property, private property. Well, only some small plots of land, but, you know, it's different, absolutely. And that's why there was a different attitude towards labor. There was this attempt to make everyone absolutely equal, uniform. There were some elements, and some of them led to the fall of the Soviet Union, but it would be wrong to say that all of that is only black and bad. That would be just improper. Even though I do know there are people who are trying to denigrate everything, criticize everything. Well, probably they should be dipped themselves into something that doesn't smell that good. So there are good things, there are bad things too. This melting pot did exist, and I think it was a good thing, because it's a source of mutual enrichment of people of different nations. If you look at the historical documents, you'll see that everywhere. When Russia was expanding its territory, it never put into a difficult position those people who entered into a unified Russian state. And this goes for their culture, their religion, their history. Look at the decrees and ordinances of Catherine the Great. There was direct instruction to treat with respect the people who were professing Islam. This was a tradition. This was something that always happened. So in that sense, if you talk about trying to preserve these traditions, you'll see that there was nothing bad about this Soviet community apart from this ideological flair that was added onto the melting pot. And I spoke about many things related to the Soviet period of our history. So I don't think we need to get stuck on that. But just as the overwhelming majority of people of my generation, we saw the problems that existed during that Soviet period, but we saw the positive things too, and we should keep that in mind. Well, I graduated from a university. Even though I came from a family of rank-and-file workers, I got a very good education from this Leningrad State University. It was a good thing. There were mechanisms that acted as social lifts, education in particular. And during that time, The principle of equalizing was applied very broadly. And some people saw the negative consequences of that equalizing. That's true, but others enjoyed some preferences, and people had access to the social lifts that I've just briefly mentioned. Maybe this is the legacy of preceding generation. Maybe this is something that was cultivated in the Soviet Union. I just remembered my family. They were very simple people, but they never spoke in slogans. But I remember all too well that even in everyday life and the family, when speaking about different problems or issues, and I would like to underscore that, in this popular manner, not in a sophisticated way, they treated their country with the utmost respect. And this was not a patriotism for show, not ostentatious patriotism. This was inside the family. It was something inherent, something inborn. And I think I have the right to say that such positive qualities were cultivated and the overwhelming majority of the Soviet people, as well as other nations of the Soviet Union. And it's no coincidence that more than 70 people voted in favor of keeping the USSR. Because many people that became independent after the dissolution of the USSR regretted that, genuinely. But we have what we have. We recognize the current realities. But as far as this Homo Sovieticus goes, well, I think I've spoken enough about that. Thank you. This year, we have a very special Valdai club, because for the first time in history, we have a Nobel Prize winner, a Peace Prize winner. I would like to give the floor to Dmitry Muratov. Good afternoon. Thank you. Mr. President, guests of the Valdai Club, Fyodor, I would like to say that we have distributed the money. We've shared that. I would like to thank the Circle of Goodness Foundation. Moreover, we hope that our modest contribution will help us draw attention to our cause, because once children hit 18 years, those people covered by the foundations will no longer get the support. But as far as I understand right now, the Circle of Goodness is willing to extend their mandate, and also the House with Lighthouse, Viera Hospice, Give a Life Foundation, as well as Anna Politkovskaya Foundation, and another fund helping the media. And that's it. So we've distributed the money among these institutions. I think this award is also something for our country, even though I think of myself as an imposter, but I want this award to help our country. And I hope it's going to be useful. And if you don't mind, I will ask a question now. I listened very carefully to what you said. Mr. President, during the Russian Energy Week, you spoke about the foreign agents. You said that Russia was not the first to adopt such a law, that the U.S. adopted such a law in the 1930s. But it doesn't mean that Russia has to adopt every law that the U.S. adopts. So my question still stands for these foreign agents. There are dozens of human rights defenders who were included into this register, and it also applies to hundreds of thousands of people who read those journalists and defenders. So I think this is a very grave matter. You've just mentioned the Leningrad State University, and I would like to tell you that your education will give us a chance to understand one another, because this law has no resort to court. You are dubbed a foreign agent, and there is no adversarial justice. There is just a stigma. There's no argument. between two parties. And it's a stigma, you know, like the stigma that was put on the shoulder of my lady in Three Musketeers, you know, but when she was executed, they read out the sentence to her before she was beheaded. But we do not have this luxury. As far as this law concerned, we do not have even a warning that starting from tomorrow you will become a foreign agent, and many treat foreign agents as enemies of the people. I remember when I was part of the guard service, and I know that the watchman first makes a warning shot upwards, and only the convoy and a camp shoots without warning. I think we need to look into that, because the criteria are so blurry there, such as getting organizational and methodological support. So I take a comment from a member of the Valdai club, and if this member represents another country, what does it mean? Does it mean that I become a foreign agent? Well, they make the announcements on Fridays, and I would like to remind you that tomorrow is a Friday. I would like to ask you to respond to that. Maybe, Mr. President, together with the head of the State Duma, you could have an extraordinary meeting with the editors of different media. And if you hold this meeting, we will be able to talk about issues that require urgent attention. Thank you. Thank you. First, I would like to present my congratulations on the Nobel Peace Prize, and I would like to remind you that I mentioned Nikolai Berdyaev. He was expelled in 1922 from the USSR on the philosophic ship, and on many occasions he was nominated for Nobel Peace Prize, but he never got one. Well, it doesn't matter. Literature or whatever. Yes, agree, yeah. But the Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize, was awarded to the first president of the USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev, and also Barack Obama, so you are in very good company. My congratulations. Well, indeed. You've just spoken about this hospice. I would give the Nobel Prize to you just for this single thing, because you are doing a noble work. The Circle of Goodness Foundation too. Your concern about foreign agents. I'm not going to try to evade the subject. You said, well, yeah, just first, the American law. Do we need to copy everything from the Americans? No, we don't need to copy everything. Not everything. But we've got many liberal people in Russia who say that we need to copy almost everything. But I agree with you, we don't need to copy everything. Second, you said that this decision is made out of court. And the same happens in the US. You are simply called to the Department of Justice and just ask your colleagues how it happens. You know, it's brutal. Sometimes it goes as far as to criminal responsibility, criminal proceedings. And it's not the position of this or that media or person. This law does not bar you from having an opinion of your own on this or that issue. This law is only related to getting financial support from abroad if you are engaged in internal political activities. That's how it goes. But even this law does not prevent you from engaging further in internal political activity, but you simply have to declare where the money comes from. Russian society has to know that this person has this or this position, his attitude towards internal political processes is this or this, and he or she gets money from abroad. And this is the right. Russian society is entitled to know that, and this is where it comes from, all of this.
So when you said that there is no ruling of court. Well, it's like this, but you've mentioned My Lady who was beheaded, but we are not beheading anyone. This is not how it works here. But you are right in one thing, and I'm not going to argue with you on that because it's true. Well, probably once again, we will look into these vague criteria. Quite often it happens, and by the way, my acquaintances told me about that, who were engaged in charity activities. So they were announced foreign agents, and by the way, I know that our colleagues in the Human Rights Council say the same. I instruct the members of the State Duma and other governmental bodies to be very attentive to this instrument and mechanism. Thank you very much for flagging this up. We will look into that. Thank you. Mr. Putin, a follow-up question. Are you not afraid of any excess? No, I am not afraid. So then we are. Well, you former KGB officers, well, you know them very well. Well, I do not know every one of them. When I was a director, I called our operatives and I read the dossiers myself, but I'm not working with this now. Well, their psychology is understandable. The ideas are very, very understandable. It's better to overdo than not to do enough. Are we going to be engaged in some blanket accusing different companies of getting money from abroad? Is it going to be indiscriminate? No, it's not going to be like that. And it seems to me that I have explained it in detail. So we have a foreign agent here. It's Margarita Simonyan. Could you share your experience, please? Yes, we have been foreign agents for many years, and I have received I have been told, and by the way, Dmitry, thank you very much for broaching up this topic, and we are told that this law is not about us because they did not include mass media outlets in the law because we should be registered as mass media outlet. And I have received a spine.
Никто не отказывается. Вот видите, как в Штатах, пятерочка.
So I have received a subpoena to come to law, and this is actually a very strict law which carries a 5-year sentence. And this law in the United States has some consequences and sanctions are imposed. For example, your accreditation is revoked, your accreditation to the Congress is revoked, and you cannot go anywhere, either to this meeting or that meeting, nowhere. Yes, and people are nodding. They know that very well. You actually work like underground there, and we will continue to work like that in the future. Mr. Putin, thank you very much for your healthy conservatism. I am a mother of 3 children. I'm afraid of the situation when my child will be able to choose a gender, sex, and she will be told that she is a human being who will feed her children with human milk. And I hope that it won't be allowed in our country, despite it being very open. You have said about blah blah. That became a humanistic foundation of the European ideas. So the freedom of speech was like that postcard, and we try to look at that. We hope that there won't be any foreign agents in our country, but actually this freedom of speech strangled our YouTube channel and our freedom of speech there on the internet. And you know that it is not our project in the first place. It was the project that we tried to make for the country, and we do not believe in anything other than reciprocal measures. And Deutsche Welle was behind us in some ratings, and still it covers events in Russia, but we cannot cover events in Germany, although we have studios there. We have been working with the audiences, but suddenly, without any trial, in a second, without any grounds, our initiative was thwarted. So we ask you, Mr. Putin, to protect us, and we can see no other way than reciprocal measures. And there is another question. There was a Congress of Compatriots taking place in Moscow, and I asked colleagues who were there. Those were the people who protect the Russian language in other countries of the world, who are ready to sacrifice themselves for that very high purpose. So there were some people who wanted to get the Russian citizenship, but they could not. There were many people like that, and we spoke about the possibility for the Donbas people to get Russian citizenship. Cannot we make it easier? Well, the Greeks, the Germans were not afraid, were not ashamed of that, of providing citizenship to the people who wanted that. So, okay, as for the reciprocal measures, I believe that we should be more careful, and if someone makes mistakes like that, and I believe that this is a mistake when we talk about closing down the channel or creating conditions when it's impossible to work. I know that bank accounts were closed. Actually, many tools have been used. That's like a blanket bombardment. Yes, I know they did everything to prevent you from working there. I know that they infringe on the freedom of speech. It is bad, but the fact that they are doing this makes you think that since you are banned to work there, it will raise interest to you. Well, yes, there is that interest, but people have no opportunities to watch our channel, YouTube channel. Yes, I understand. As for the reciprocal measures, I do not think they should not be counterproductive. As for the Russian citizenship, well, yes, you're right, and my position is as follows. We need to improve this tool. There are social and economic factors, including hospitals, kindergartens, jobs that we should think of. Houses for those people, well, but still, we should have a more liberal legislation on citizenship, and this is what our labor market requires as well, so we'll think about that. Thank you. Colleagues, apart from those people who are present here in the room, there are participants who are watching us online. They didn't manage to come, so I ask Robert Legwald, the honorary professor of the Columbia University, has joined us. Could you please show him?
For me, it's a disappointment that I've not been able to be with all of the participants in the Valdai conference. but I'm particularly pleased to have this opportunity to be part of this session. The topic of Valdai this year has been very transcendent and fundamental questions, and I admire Valdai for doing that. And Mr. President, President Putin has certainly risen to the challenge of that agenda and has addressed it in an extremely engaging and revealing fashion. My question, however, is narrower, much more specific, and I apologize for descending to this level, but it's a question that's important in my country. I think it's a question that's important in your question. Although neither your government nor the Biden administration believes that a reset of the U.S.-Russian relationship is possible at this juncture, how do you evaluate or how do you assess the evolution of the U.S.-Russia relationship since your meeting with President Biden in June? In what areas has there been progress, if any, and what, in your view, are the obstacles to further progress? Thank you very much.
Я в целом уже говорил.
So I have already answered the questions like that. I can only repeat myself. However, there are some things that I can say right now about the developments. The Geneva summit was productive by and large. And it seemed to us, when I say us, I mean my colleagues, so it seemed to us that the American administration is interested in rebuilding their relations, so at least in some areas. So what did we agree upon? We agreed to relaunch the consultation on strategic stability, and they started indeed. They are ongoing. And there should be also consultations on cybersecurity, and they have started at the expert level as well. So we should say that the number of questions and issues that we have agreed upon is not that big, but still we have managed to agree upon something, and it's a big progress. And the American administration and Russia have been implementing the plans and have been moving forward. And as we know, it is always a message, a systemic signal. Look, our trade turnover increased by 23% in many areas. It is an indirect influence of our meeting in Geneva. So by and large, we have taken the right route, the right path, and I'm not going to speak about some unfortunate things. We have always said that we are making a one step forward and two steps back, but by and large, on some most important areas, we have making a headway. So it's like that. Thank you. So since we are living in a new world, we have the world of digital technologies. We have a colleague from Beijing, Mr. Chou Bo.
Really my great honor to ask you this question. First of all, let me thank you for this opportunity. I will ask you something about Afghanistan. Afghanistan lies in the heart of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So if Afghanistan has a problem, then the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has a problem. Now the United States has withdrawn from Afghanistan. So how can Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is led by China and Russia, united with other countries to help Afghanistan to achieve political stability and economic development? Thank you.
Well, you know, it's one of the most pressing issues nowadays. The situation in Afghanistan is very acute, and we have had a meeting with the representatives of the Taliban movement and the People's Republic of China has been working on Afghan issues as well, quite actively, and for us all, it is a very important issue because Russia and China believe that it is very crucial to have a calm and developing Afghanistan close to our borders. The Afghanistan which is not a source of terrorism or radicalism of any kind. So we can see what's going on in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, there are still terrorist groups like ISIL and some Taliban movement representatives have fallen victims to the attacks, and the Taliban movement has been trying to get rid of these radical elements. And for Russia and China, it is very important to ensure stabilization, and to achieve this, we need to help it restore the economy, because there is another big problem, which is drug trafficking, and 90% of them go from Afghanistan. If terrorists have no money, how are they going to fund the activities? And the Taliban needs money as well. And Russia and China and other SCO member states should help Afghanistan, but the main responsibility is borne by those who have been there for 20 years. The most important thing that we can do now is to unblock the financial assets to let Afghanistan solve all the top-of-mind issues. There are projects that we can implement there. They're related to ensuring internal security, for example, and our special services maintain contacts with the corresponding Afghan structures. And within the SCO, it is important to start this work. And Tajikistan and Uzbekistan are Afghanistan's neighbors. And our military base is in Tajikistan, which was established on the basis of a Soviet Division 201. So bilaterally, we will continue to engage in this work with China and try to establish and build dialogue with the corresponding structures. And we will continue to do so within the SCO by investing money and creating conditions for our citizens feeling safely there, regardless of the developments in Afghanistan.
Mikhail Pogrebinsky.
Thank you. Mikhail Pogrebinsky. Thank you, Fyodor. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll try to ask a question, the response to which I think is awaited by hundreds of thousands of people. You remember the Chinese proverb of how bad it is to live in the time of change. And Russia has been living in a time of change for the last 3 decades, and right now the situation is becoming increasingly difficult, what with the pandemic and the winter. Just, you know, recently Lloyd Austin, head of the Department of Defense of the US, brought millions worth in arms and weapons to Europe. And you don't need to be a NATO member to deploy the infrastructure of American or US infrastructure in Ukraine. I think this process has already started with the visit of Lloyd Austin to Ukraine and the transfer of weapons. You wrote in your article that the transformation of Ukraine into anti-Russia is unacceptable to millions of people, and that is corroborated by the polls, because more than 40% of people have a very good attitude, a good attitude towards Russia. But the transformation has already been triggered. Maybe a lot of headway has been done in that direction, which I think is a very dangerous way. And I think if this thing with NATO-related infrastructure continues to be implemented, then this process of turning of Ukraine into an anti-Russia, the process that is still shaky, would be consolidated and would be like that for many years to come. So if this process continues, this is going to present a serious threat to Russia, and this can be fraught with the complete disappearance of Ukrainian statehood. And people who speak against this regime are subject to repressions. You know, Viktor Medvedchuk runs the risk of being thrown behind bars for coming up with courageous ideas. So what do you think needs to be done? How do we stop this process? How fast can it be done? And what, if anything, can be done to rectify the situation? I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you because I do not have an answer to your question so far. On the one hand, it's all on the surface. The simplest thing is to say that it's up to the Ukrainian people themselves to make a decision, to form organs of government that would respond to its aspirations and expectations. On the one hand, that's just like that. On the other hand, you know, I cannot but mention that you just mentioned Viktor Medvedchuk. There are criminal proceedings trying to make him responsible for high treason. And for what? Has he stolen some secrets? Has he transferred secrets to anyone? No. He is being persecuted because of his frank, open political position, which seeks to stabilize the internal political situation in Ukraine and to build bridges with neighboring countries, the relations with which are of the utmost importance to Ukraine itself. So what's concerning is that there is not a chance these people can raise their heads. Some of them are simply killed in the streets and others are thrown behind bars. So it would seem as if there are no legal means for the Ukrainian people to form such bodies of power that would respond to the interests of Ukrainian people. People are simply afraid to answer polls because there is a handful of people that have virtually appropriated the laurels of victors in the fight against independence, adhere to extreme political views, and they're the ones that run the country, regardless of who is officially at the helm. Because traditionally, people arrived in power based on the voters from the southeast, and once in power, they changed radically. They made a volte-face in their political leanings after arriving in power. So there was a majority that voted for them in the hope that they would make good on their promises. But there was this aggressive, vociferous political minority that simply suppressed the attempts to respond to the interests of the overwhelming majority of Ukrainian citizens. So this minority runs the country. This is kind of a dead end, and so far I do not quite see a way out of it. But We'll live and see. We'll see how the situation unfolds in the internal political scene of Ukraine in the coming years. We, for one, are doing our utmost to build these relations. But the danger that you've cited, you've mentioned, is of paramount importance to us. And you're absolutely correct when you say that there is no need to have an official membership in NATO. The military deployment has already started, and it brings a real threat to the Russian Federation, and we realize that fully. Look at what was happening in the at the end of the 1980s or beginning of the 90s. I do not want to go into the details, but what you said makes me think that I need to say that. After the unification of Germany, there was all this talk that under no circumstances was there a chance that NATO infrastructure would move eastwards. This was one thing Russia had to be sure of. This is what was mentioned in public, but in practice, they tricked us. And they say, show us a paper that says that there was the first expansion, there was another expansion. What are the consequences thereof? Military, strategic consequences. The infrastructure is getting increasingly close to our border. In Poland, in Romania, ABM systems have been installed with Aegis launchers. And you can install Tomahawks on these launch pads. And these are offensive systems, and you can switch them, you know, just in a blink of an eye. All you need to change is the software, and no one will be any the wiser. We can also place intermediate and shorter range missiles there. Did anyone respond positively to our announcement that we are not going to deploy similar missiles in the European part of Russia if we produce any? But we still wait for someone from the American side to say the same. They're not responding to our announcement. We're all adults here. So what are we to do? Yes, you mentioned the visit of the defense secretary. He's basically opening the door for Ukraine to enter NATO. And this is how we can interpret this visit. On the one hand, yes, each and every country has the right to make their own choices. No one denies that. You mentioned those Europeans. I spoke to many of them personally. So today you've got this politician, tomorrow they disappear, being replaced by someone else who emerges to the political stage. So, you know, it cannot serve as a guarantee of security for Russia. It's nothing but idle talk. And that is why we're concerned. Mr. President, I'm sorry. As far as military bases go, I know that there are some constitutional provisions, but no one bars training centers, and under the guise of training centers, you can place anything there. And you know, there were public announcements. If tomorrow a missile is deployed next to Kharkiv, so we're not the ones who are trying to sneak our missiles there. Others are doing that right next to our borders. Yes, Secretary General of NATO gave an interview. Mr. Stoltenberg said that NATO is going to readjust its strategy right now. China and Russia are treated not just two threats, but as one single threat. This is a very and far-reaching approach. But if they view us in this way, does it mean that we have to join forces with China and view someone as a threat? We spoke about that on many occasions. We are friends with China, but not against someone, but in mutual interests, in the interests of one another. Secondly, unlike NATO countries, we are not trying to create an exclusive military bloc. There is no military bloc between Russia and China, and we've got no such objective right now. So such discussions are simply groundless. Mark Champion, please.
On the subject of the potential of sending extra gas to Europe, which, as you know, is in a gas crisis at the moment. You've spoken about it before, but at times it's been quite confusing. Sometimes Russian officials indicate that there is additional gas available that can be sent if Nord Stream 2 is opened, and at other times they've suggested that there is no gas available to send to Europe. And I just wondered if you would take this opportunity to clarify whether there is additional gas available that Russia can send to Europe if, say, Nord Stream opened tonight, or if there isn't.
Well, to be honest, it's somewhat perplexing to hear such questions. Because I think when I spoke during the Russian Energy Week, I said it all in Moscow. But since such issues still crop up, I think I'll have to respond once again. Listen, what's happening right now? Yesterday, the day before yesterday, we had a talk with the government, and it's not just about the energy sources. It's about the very state of the global economy. Leading countries, European countries have a deficit of gas. Let's have a look at the U.S. Recently, the U.S. decided to increase the ceiling for government debt. For those who are not well versed in economy, what does this decision entail? It means that the Fed is going to print more money, and it'll give this money to the government. So it's new emission of new money. The deficit is growing. Inflation rates are going up as well as a derivative. And it brings about an increase in energy prices. It's not the obverse. This is the sequence in which it happens. But the state of affairs is further exacerbated by the realities in the energy market. What are these realities exactly? You've just mentioned Europe. What is happening in Europe? I'll repeat. Maybe I'm going to say some things that I said in the past. Look at the philosophy that the European Commission has espoused over the recent years. This philosophy sought to regulate the energy market, in particular the gas market, through the spot market, through the spot trade. They were trying to convince us to abandon the so-called long-term contracts. In these long-term contracts, the prices are tied to stock exchange prices for oil and oil products. So this is a market mechanism for pricing. But since gas prices have a lag of 6 months after the oil prices change, it means that long-term contracts are more stable, and it means that after 6 months, both the consumers and the suppliers can make adjustments, if need be, with due regard for the recent developments in the world markets. But the Europeans tried to boil it all down to a spot market. And in spot markets, it's not real gas, not physical volumes of gas. You know, it's all on paper. Whereas physical volumes can be non-existent. And there are several factors to be taken into account. Cold winter, to start with. The gas that is stored in the underground storage facilities. Summer without wind. A very hot summer, sweltering hot. There was no enough wind generation. 2, there were some macroeconomic factors which I have mentioned. The industry, you can have a look at it too. So what happens in the European market? On the one hand, you have decreasing production in gas-producing countries. The gas production has gone down in Europe. In the first half of the year by 22.5 billion cubic meters. Another thing, 18.5 billion cubic meters was not, well, it is the deficit that was not pumped into the underground storage facilities during the first 6 months. And since the year is almost at an end, you've got to multiply it by 2. 9 billion cubic meters, mostly from the US and the Middle East. These companies, they have taken that gas from Europe and rerouted it to Asia and to Latin America. When the Europeans formulated the principles that had to underlie the gas market in Europe, and when they said that everything was to be based on spot market, they thought that it was a premium market. But it turns out that the European market is not working at a premium.
So they have rerouted it into Latin America and Asia. I have already said that it's 18 billion cubic meters multiplied by 2. So 19 billion cubic meters is the deficit that the Middle East and the United States have not provided us. And the deficit at the European market will stand at 70 billion cubic meters. It is a big figure. So what does Russia have to do with that? It is the result of the policy pursued by the European Commission, and Russia has nothing to do with that. Russia and Gazprom has decreased supplies to the European market by and large by 8.7%. This was the decrease of supplies made by Gazprom, and there was a plus 12% of supplies that we have delivered to China and to global market in general. So our gas supplies surged by 8.7 billion cubic meters, and on the whole, it's 11 billion cubic meters more. So the Americans have not provided another 9 billion cubic meters of gas. So can you see what's going on? And all parties concerned, do you listen to me? So someone is decreasing gas supplies, and we are, on the other hand, increasing gas supplies. And moreover, when it comes to long-term contracts, please pay attention to that. $1,200 US for the 1,000 cubic meters. Actually, those who receive gas under long-term contracts receive gas that is 4 times less expensive, and Gazprom receives no profit on that because we are interested in long-term contracts. And when we do that, we invest into the production and we provide gas to our consumers, which are stable and reliable. Can we pump more gas? Well, yes, we can when it comes to Nord Stream 2, by the way, and the first pipeline is filled with gas. And if tomorrow the German regulator approves the gas supply, we will start it tomorrow, and it will be 17.5 billion cubic meters. And in December, we will finish the technological work related to filling the second pipeline of the Nord Stream 2, and it will total 55 billion cubic meters. If we take into account the fact that the deficit at the European market will stand at 70, well, 55, it's a big figure. And as soon as the second pipe is filled, and as soon as we get the approval of the German regulator, we'll start gas supplies the next day. You have asked whether it is possible, and I can tell you that, yes, it is possible, but we should take a responsible approach to mutual obligations and work on that. By the way, we have spoken a lot about Nord Stream 2 and Gazprom. Actually, there are 5 European companies participating in the process. Why are we talking about Gazprom only? There are 5 big European companies working in this area, within this project, I mean. So it's not only in the interest of Gazprom, it's in the interest of our partners, especially European partners. So, Mr. Putin, about Nord Stream 2. Well, actually, it's your joint achievement with Angela Merkel. I'm not going to miss her. She's leaving. So it's not the decision that I have made. It's hers. She might have run for another term. She has been at the helm for 16 years. This is much, but Mr. Kohl was also ruling the country for many years. But as for Nord Stream 2, we have launched it together with Mr. Schröder, and when we launched Nord Stream 1 projects, the situation was the same, like today with Nord Stream 2. But fortunately, Germany and other European countries are receiving gas through Nord Stream 1 and much gas. So we have spoken a lot about green energy, about clean energy, and if there are some questions on that, I will try to come up with my ideas on that. So the carbon share is 3 times lower in our gas than in the American liquefied natural gas. So if our environmentalists are not biased, if they indeed care about the future of the humankind, they cannot but hear that. So they should insist not on closing down on the terminals that gather natural gas. And the same is true for Ukraine. Nord Stream 2 suggests modern technologies. There are pipes that allow high pressure. There are no emissions, and those compressor stations are like small factories running on gas, and they emit CO2. So they emit 5.6 times less than through the gas network of Ukraine, because it is very old, and environmentalists should have said that it should be closed down long ago. But they say the opposite. And the same is true for oil. It seems to me that I have spoken in detail on the gas problem. So since 2009 till 2016, the investment into oil production have stood at approximately $400 billion a year. And in the pre-pandemic period, they dropped by 40%, and now they total 260 billion. And you know, it's a cycle which goes from 15 to 30 years. Well, what are the problems that we have been facing right now? I have already said about different political aspects of them. You know, it's a very important thing that has come to my mind. The political cycles in the leading economies do not correspond to investment cycles, including in such crucial sphere as energy. The political cycle is 4 or 5 years, and what is being done by the leading political forces and parties and individuals, what are they doing? They make promises. There are different promises, there are lots of promises, and they promise lower prices for everything. And the same is true for the green economy. And what is the result? The banks stop providing loans for investment, and at some point of time, we will get to the point when, for example, today, OPEC plus countries have been increasing production even more than we have agreed to do. But not all the countries can do that. Not all producers can do that. This is a process, a long-term process, because the cycle is big. Regiter Gamso, please, you have the floor.
President, it's good to see you again in Valdai and Sochi. My name is Raghida Dargham. I'm the founder and executive chairman of Beirut Institute. So I come to Sochi from Lebanon, a very wounded country. I am sure, sir, that you are aware of the explosion that took place, the fourth largest at the port, the civilian port of Beirut. There has been an attempt to investigate what happened, the story itself. There was a Russian captain, there was a Georgian owner of the ship. There was a request to you, Mr. President, to share, the request came to you from the judiciary, when it's an independent body from the government, to share what you have from your satellite pictures to tell us, to help find the story, this horrible story that happened, that amounted to assassination of a city, of a capital. My first question, sir, are you willing to share now the information you have, the satellite information, and to lend cooperation to this investigation so that, you know, the values that you spoke about are implemented where it really matters? And secondly, your two allies, Hezbollah and Iran, have been resisting, and in fact, they have been demanding the dislodging of the, not a prosecutor, he's really the investigator, the judge who's investigating the case. They have issued an they have issued a warning, Hezbollah issued a warning, that if you do not, to both your friends of yours, the President, Michel Aoun, and to the Prime Minister, Mikhati, that if they do not dislodge this investigator, this judge, then the government will fall. Do you support such a position, particularly that this country is on the verge of a civil war, and with Mr. Nasrallah announcing that he will not back down, announcing at the same time that there's 100,000 fighters ready to launch? And so this is a civil war in the action, maybe right next door to a prize accomplishment of yours, Mr. Vladimir Putin, which is in Syria. I thank you.
Я прошу прощения. Подождите, не отдавайте микрофон, не отдавайте.
Could you please not take back the mic? What war are you talking about? What war are you talking about?
You see, the armed people are on the streets already. There are you do remember the civil war in Lebanon, and right now you have Hezbollah is not the only armed group. I'm not claiming that. There are many groups armed. But right now the conflict is over this investigator. His name is Tariq al-Bitar. And insistence of Hezbollah that he needs to be dislodged. And in fact, interfering with them, with the very principle of the separation of powers. And that led to confrontations on the streets and a possibility of a civil war really happening, Mr. President. Do not dismiss that possibility. It's a very scary one. And I'm not sure at all it will be in the interest of the Russian policy, even for Syria, never mind for Lebanon. And we wish that you will pay attention to Lebanon, particularly after hearing you today emphasizing the issue of values.
Да, значит, Первое, что касается взрыва в...
First, as far as the explosion in the Beirut port goes, to be honest, when this tragedy transpired, well, I would like to express my condolences once again to the people of Lebanon. There were great losses, the damages are exorbitant, and I learned about that from the media. I know that there was some explosive materials many years ago. It was imported and it was unloaded in the port. And as far as I understand, there was this desire to sell that at a premium, but there were some market difficulties, internal controversies. I know there was this story, and this is where the strategy has come from. And if we can help with this investigation, I do not quite understand how the satellite images can help, and if we have them, but I promise you that I'll look into that, and if we have those images, if we can help the investigation, we will do that. But first I need to talk to my colleagues who might have this information. Now, as far as Iran, Hezbollah, and the situation in Lebanon, Hezbollah and many people have different attitudes towards this organization. I know that very well. Hezbollah is a serious political force in Lebanon itself, but without any doubt, always. And in the case of Lebanon, we always advocate using dialogue as a means to settle any dispute, any problem, and we try to do that. And we are in contact with almost all political forces in Lebanon, and we'll try to do that in future to achieve a settlement of the situation without any bloodshed, because no one is interested in bloodshed, especially given the fact that the situation in the Middle East has always been on the brink, on the verge of the recent years. So we'll do everything to convince all parties to the internal political process of the need that they need to remain within the bounds of common sense. Yes, please take the mic.
Do you support the ultimatum given by Hezbollah that either the investigator Tariq Bitar is dislodged or there is a downfall of the government? Do you support that ultimatum?
Ну, послушайте, уважаемые.
Well, unfortunately, we cannot comment on the internal political processes that are happening in Lebanon, whether we support that or not. We simply cannot say that, whether we support the position of the opposing force, because if we express such support, that would mean siding with one of the opposing parties, and that would be counterproductive from the point of view of efficiency of our intermediary efforts in helping to achieve a reconciliation. So allow me to refrain from siding with anyone. What I need to say is that there needs to be a platform upon which an agreement can be reached without any shots fired, without any bloodshot, and we in Russia are interested in such a peaceful settlement. Yes, please. Stanislav Tkachenko. Thank you very much. Stanislav Tkachenko, St. Petersburg State University. I've got a question about energy. On October the 13th this year, Josep Borrell, head of the European External Action Service, publicly announced and sent an Arctic strategy to the European Commission. This is a strategic document of the European Union that treats a wide array of issues, in particular energy issues. I would like to point to two pillars. First, the European Union thinks that the mineral resources, oil, gas, coal in the Arctic, have to remain in the subsoil of this region. And to achieve that, they would probably have to introduce some kind of a temporary moratorium. And the second issue goes hand in hand with that, because the European countries intend to come up with a series of financial instruments to make countries such as Russia and others that could sell energy resources from the Arctic, to prevent them from selling those resources if the resources are produced in the Arctic? So that is my question, basically. I try to follow what's happening there in Europe, but, you know, I do not always have the time. I try to catch up, as they say. As far as the Arctic strategy is concerned, I can say that we have a strategy of our own, the strategy that stipulates our presence there. We are also taking an active part in the Arctic Council. Right now we are chairing it, and the Arctic Council is comprised of countries that are part of the European Union too. Another thing, I said that at Geneva during my meeting with President Biden, or during my meeting with his team, and I will say that again, we are willing to engage in an open cooperation with all interested parties, with all stakeholders in the Arctic, based on the principles of international law. There is a number of conventions on the territorial sea, as you're aware, on the law of the sea, the Convention of 1982. So we are guided by these internationally recognized documents that we have joined, and based on these instruments, we are willing to build our relations with the rest of the world, including the EU. But if there is someone who tries to circumvent these documents and thereby limit our sovereign right to dispose of our territory, and territorial sea is part of the territory of a sea bordering nation, then it's an encroachment on our rights. And the same goes for the exclusive economic zone that extends 400 miles. There are certain rules determined by international law, and we're fully in compliance with those requirements. And on another note, we've just spoken about Nord Stream 2. In compliance with the above-mentioned rules, we were supposed to get the necessary authorization from the sea-bordering nations, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, even when we constructed the pipeline not in their territorial waters, but through their exclusive economic zone, because that meant complying with the norms of international law. We defer to international law, and all the Europeans required that we should act in line with these norms. What about them? Do they intend to be in compliance themselves? Do they want us to be in compliance, whereas they want to violate themselves? No, that won't go. If they want to limit their activities in energy, well, they have the right to try. Let them try. We see what's happening in the European energy market. If they continue to, in this vein, acting so categorically without any grounds, this won't bring about anything good. You know, there is a very good Russian fairy tale well known to the Russian audience. One of the characters makes the wolf to catch fish with his tail in winter, and he sits next to the wolf and says, "Freeze, freeze, wolf's tail." And if the Europeans try to embark on this path, then they will find themselves in the shoes of these characters. But who is the wolf in this case? I do not think it's hard to guess. I didn't get it. Russia? Are they trying to conjure us? The wolf, as the one who decided to put the tail into the ice hole in winter, tries to catch fish in those murky waters. They're the ones to freeze, you know. They're trying to limit the investments. You just heard me say that it takes 15, 30 years for the investment cycle in oil to happen, and banks are already refusing to provide the necessary funds for these projects, for these investments. So there you have it. There's going to be a deficit in the coming years, and no one is going to be able to do anything about that. You see, decisions in energy, regrettably, are taken within the framework of the political cycles that I've just mentioned, and these decisions are made not by experts. A colleague said that it's not the engineers who give the call. Politicians who are not well versed in these matters, and they are basically swindling their voters. They're trying to scare everyone with the climate agenda. Painting a very grim picture for our prospects should we fail to rein in the increase in temperatures. Yeah. As compared to the pre-industrial levels. We know about that. 1.5, 2 degrees, that's the threshold. But we've got to be cautious and prudent about that. We need an in-depth analysis, not political slogans. Nonetheless, in some countries, we see it is happening based on such political slogans that are simply not practicable. And no one will prevent us from doing what we think is necessary in our territory. We want to have an agreement, but we're hopeful for a professional discussion. Mr. President, you are always appealing to international law, and you have cited international law. But international law, you know, these are not the tablets given to Moses. International law is based on a balance of interests. Maybe international law has to be adjusted. It always is adjusted, but with a lag. It happens. International relations, social relations are developing faster than law does. And this is a principle that is all too well known to theoreticians of state and law. Relations are developing very fast. They require regulation. And legislators usually lag behind these changes. But international law is a whole body of international norms. These are not just, you know, some rules you jot down on a piece of paper under a blanket, hoping that everyone will be in compliance. No, these are norms that have been agreed upon, especially if we talk about public international law. These are the norms that govern the relations between countries. It's a fruit of agreement. You arrive at an agreement, you sign it, and then you are to comply. And if someone has not signed anything, you cannot require them to do that, because that would mean basically trying to impose an alien will on another country. So the faster we abandon such methodologies, the better it's going to be, the calmer the world is going to be, and more stable too. We've got another American colleague, Christian Wynton, from the Center for National Interests of the U.S. Can we put Christian on the screen right now? Christian, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for calling on me, and thank you for Valdai for organizing this important conference. President Putin, I really appreciate your important comments, which I don't think we've heard from any other world leader about culture and its importance. One person here in the United States that might be interested and supportive of what you said is former President Donald Trump. I'm not certain about that, but he's spoken of similar things. My question for you is that there's a lot of speculation that former President Trump may again run for office in 2024. And you've spoken about Angela Merkel, for example. What do you think about the idea of a second Donald Trump presidency?
Would you vote for him? Would you vote for him if he were to run? Oh, well, there's nothing to laugh about here. Well, help us. Would you vote for Donald Trump if he runs again? Christian.
Putin. Yes, my view, and I worked in the Trump administration at the State Department early in his administration. I think it's remarkable. He's redefined conservatism, perhaps on some of the similar lines that President Putin talked about healthy conservatism. However, in our system, if you begin a second term, you're essentially a lame duck. In that you cannot run again, so people start discounting you. Also, I like what Donald Trump does in challenging the vocal minority that has infected our culture. But on the other hand, his administration had a lot of inefficiencies, if you will, staff in very senior levels that did not agree with his agenda. Sometimes it seemed like the authority of his presidency didn't extend beyond the White House to the rest of the very large U.S. government. So my preference is that other conservatives step up, like Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, step up and run for president. But if it is a choice between Donald Trump and a Democrat, I would vote for Donald Trump, yes.
Уважаемый коллега, позвольте...
Christian, well, allow me not to say anything what I think, and I would also like to refrain from commenting. Otherwise, you would be dubbed as a foreign agent.
Сама идея,
So the very idea that you've just floated, I understand it, but I wouldn't comment. And thank you very much for joining us. Anastasia Likachova. Thank you. Mr. President, you have mentioned such issues as lack of potable water, food crisis. So Russia has the unique reservoir of Baikal. We are second in terms of such potable water resources. We have other great potential, agricultural potential. So what creative role can we play in that regard? Well, it's not about the prospects. It's about what we're doing. We're already playing this creative role. And let me dwell a little bit on the concerns related to this potential food crisis and related issues. I spoke about that during the recent meeting with the government. I said that there are some, some failures, systemic failures due to the interruption of supply chains. And it's not just about the Suez Canal or about lack of lorry drivers in the UK to distribute the petrol. There are other factors, of course. COVID-19 is a factor, but there are others as well. And if you look at this concatenation of circumstances, you'll have the following picture. We have spoken about an increase in energy prices, which results in higher electricity prices. We have 20 euro per kilowatt hour, whereas in the European countries, 1 kilowatt hour can cost 300, even more than that. Yes, the income level there is different, but the disparity is far too great. What are some governments doing? Some international institutions say that this is the right thing. Sometimes there is talk about providing subsidies to the citizens. There is a proposal to subsidize this exorbitant increase in energy tariffs. So maybe that can be the right thing to do. The government has to provide support. But this is a short-term solution, just tinkering. Because when the next stage comes, the citizens will be the ones to suffer. Why so? Because the volume of primary energy sources is not going to grow. So some will be undersupplied. The subsidized households will keep their consumption at the previous level, despite the scary stories broadcast by the German TV. If they get the subsidies, they will keep their consumption at the same level. But the supply volume is not going to grow. Someone will have to shrink their requirements. The industry, the metal producers, and it'll entail a whole chain, everything related to metal, and it's enormous. the cars. And the cravat pins, the tie pins. You see that the companies are shutting down. The producers of fertilizers. Fertilizers that are produced with the help of natural gas. They are already shutting down production, and there are grounds to believe that there's going to be a lack of fertilizers.
As a result, there will be less food provided, and prices will hike. And then we will go back to the same consumers whom we want to help. Well, it's the right thing to do, it seems. But we should think about different things. We should think whether there is a need to try to impose restrictions on production, including in the Arctic, whether on political grounds we need to stop the launching of different pipelines like Nord Stream 2. It is about these fundamental things that we should muse. We should take into account increase the number of risks. We should not put everything into spot contracts. We should think about the future. We should ensure that the common sense prevails. We should think about long-term contracts. This is what we should think about, and only then we can avoid sudden crises. As of today, Russia has been making a contribution into food security. We have been increasing food deliveries into the global market. Our export totals $5 billion and even more, $25 billion. And I have said it on numerous occasions. I would like to thank our food producers. This is the work that they have been doing. We could never dream about that, and we should thank Europeans for the sanctions in the sphere of agriculture that they have imposed. Well done. We have introduced reciprocal measures in the sphere of agriculture, and we have invested in agriculture and into input replacement, and it yielded good results. So we racked brains, we used the previous developments in high-tech spheres, and I hope that we will increase production in the sphere of agriculture. And due to climate change, there are some changes in agriculture. The quality of soil becomes different, and everything moves northward. There are different factors that change, that make difference, including desertification and many other things. Russia will be able to provide food to its own citizen and to the European market at good prices. I have already said that companies that produce fertilizers are shutting down, and it's actually on them that crop yield depends. But we have been providing enough fertilizers to the markets, and we are ready to increase them. And when it comes to the quality, our fertilizers are one of the best. Our rivals try not to say about how detrimental the fertilizers are to the health of human beings. I'm not going to go into details about that right now. Well, you have mentioned water resources. Some people tell that water will be more expensive than oil. We are not going to reverse the rivers. We should be very careful about that. We should understand the long-term consequences of the decisions that we are making right now. But Russia is one of the countries, the water balance of which has enough water for the future, but we should take this into account. Still, we should think about how clean our rivers are, including in the Far East, Baikal Lake. There are problems in Russia. We know about them, and we will work on them within the plans that we have formulated. And when we face new challenges, we will try to overcome them. Vera Ageva. Good afternoon. Vera Ageva, St. Petersburg, HSC. I would like to go back to the question about soft power. We have already started discussing it, but I would like to get a broader picture. Over the past years, Russia has reinforced its soft power in such spheres: culture, education, youth exchanges, but we haven't reached all the goals. Like, for example, the image of Russia abroad and establishing dialogue with foreign audiences. So my question is as follows. How can we make Russia's soft power more effective? So we should respect ourselves. We shouldn't bend backwards to try to prove that we are good. We shouldn't do that. This is the most important thing to do. We should respect our history, culture, and then people will get attracted. And to you, Richard Sakwa.
You mentioned at the beginning of your speech the climate change issue, the floods, fires, not just in Russia but elsewhere. And as you know, at the end of this month, 31st of October, COP26, we're meeting in Glasgow. So I wanted to ask you three things in particular. First is how your own personal views of climate emergency have evolved, because this isn't the first time we've mentioned it at the Valdai Club, and of course your comments today have evolved and over time, and clearly the emergency has got worse. Second, the way in which Russia can take a lead in this COP discussions and other discussions. You've mentioned the Russia Energy Week last week, in which you announced that the goal to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, which I think was a huge change in development. But I wonder in other ways in which Russia could show leadership on the climate emergency. And the third thing is, many countries, the United States has talked about a Green New Deal, European Union, a Green Deal. I wonder how Russia can actually make the climate emergency not just a question of technocracy and policies, but a form of changing people's behavior to make the quality of life better in cities and in more sustainable and more balanced, and indeed using the experience of the pandemic about work-life balance and so on. So if you want to change the balance between work and life and the state and society in this better progressive way. Thank you.
So you've mentioned taking the leading role in that. We should strive to solve a most complicated task, and we have said that we intend to be carbon neutral country by 2060, and we have been trying to do that. And I have said that on numerous occasions, that our energy grid is cleaner than in other developed countries of the world. 86% of our energy mix includes nuclear energy, which does not emit CO2, then hydropower generation and alternatives, renewables. And in the United States, it's 77%. In Germany, it's 64%. In big Asian countries, it's even less. Isn't this leadership? We have already become leaders in that, but we understand that this is not enough, because we can see temperature rises here, which go faster than in other countries, and it is especially true for the northern part of our countries. It has very serious consequences, taking into account the fact that large parts of Russia are in the far north. We do think about that. And as for the quality of life of people, we have been trying to eliminate landfills, which do emit CO2 as well and lead to people suffering. And we are trying to tackle this as well. And we have a program for big industrial centers. Maybe we are not moving quite fast, but we have managed to implement the plans. We might have done that much earlier, but we didn't manage to do that due to 2008-2009 financial crisis. And there was an outcry from industrialists because many enterprises wouldn't be able to cope with the high pressure. But now we are implementing all the decisions that are part of our legislation. There are 12 big cities that emit the largest amount of CO2, and we should deal with their problems first, and we will continue to do so in relation to different spheres. So this is part of our national plans. It is our priority. And as for carbon neutrality, we should bear in mind that 45% is of all the emissions are absorbed. And by the way, we will insist that our absorption capacities should be taken into account, including our seas and forests and ocean territories. This is an objective thing that should be taken into account. We have big plans in the utility sector and energy saving. So we have something to do here, and we will do that. So by and large, we should not act upon our plans autonomously. We should strive to achieve good results, and in a transparent and open way, we are ready to do that. I hope that the fight for solving environmental issues won't become a tool of political strife. It would undermine the trust to us of what we have been doing for the future of the humankind. And Mr. Putin, do we have a program when the carbon border adjustment tax will be introduced by the European Union? Well, you know, as for the decisions that are not transparent, they're not being made, and I have spoken to some EU leaders, and they do understand that the measures they have been taken are not transparent, they are not just, and they should be worked upon in the future. And hopefully it will be done in the dialogue with other partners, including Russia. Angela Stant, who has long been with us. Angela Stant, could you please put her on the screen? So please, you have the floor.
I'm sorry, I'm only here virtually. Mr. President, I heard you talk about some ways in which the US and Russia are working together, and I want to ask you another question about Afghanistan. 20 years ago, Russia and the United States, they cooperated to defeat al-Qaeda and to remove the Taliban from power. 20 years later now, in the aftermath of the American withdrawal, do you believe that counter-terrorist cooperation between Russia and the United States is desirable? Is it possible? Do you think we would still share some of the same goals in vis-a-vis Afghanistan that we did 20 years ago?
I think that cooperation in the counterterrorism sphere between Russia and the United States is indeed both possible, desirable, and necessary. We have spoken about that on numerous occasions, and I'm sorry that you are not with us today. You have joined us online, but evidently it's a common threat, and it's not becoming less dangerous than 20 years ago, unfortunately. And moreover, it is expanding, and it has become global indeed. And only by joining hands we can fight this threat. I have already said that our special services have maintained contact. However, it seems to me that we can deepen the cooperation between them, but we are grateful to our American partners for the information that allowed us to prevent terrorist attacks in Russia. I can assure you that we will everything we can and provide necessary information to our American colleagues if it is of interest to them, if we have this information, and this is what we are all interested in. And as for Afghanistan, Mr. Putin, the Taliban, the de facto authorities of the country, have come to Moscow, have been discussing issues with our ministers. Are they going not to be recognized by Russia? Well, you know, we have maintained contact with them, and it's not about the Taliban itself. The decisions are made at the level of the United Nations organizations, and we expect Taliban that has controlled the situation in the country would behave and would take positive measures. And it seems to me that we approach this point, and hopefully the decisions will be made like before, when we put this movement on the list of terrorist organizations. It seems to me we have had few questions from Asia. Mr. Simatemai from Japan is with us. Thank you. It's a great honor for me, though I didn't manage to come to Sochi. The remarks that you've made are very important to me, especially the words that you have said about antagonism, especially in the Asian countries. Together with Prime Minister Abe, you have tried to tackle the problem and sign a peace treaty. However, over the past 2 years, there were 2 prime ministers of Japan who met you. And what can you say about the future of Russia-Japan relations? Thank you.
Well, yeah, indeed. Internal political life in Japan is organized in such a way that changes in the political scene can happen very fast, but the interests of the Japanese people and the Russian people are the same, and these interests, they imply the need to regulate, to settle our relations to the full, in particular through concluding a peace treaty, and this is something we will seek, even though people change at the helm of Japan. You know, on October the 7th, I spoke to the new Prime Minister of Japan, as you are aware. I had a telephone conversation with him. He is very experienced. He knows the relations with Russia inside out because he was responsible for foreign affairs. He is also a close ally to former Prime Minister Abe. So I think from that point of view, I think we can expect a continuity of Japan's attitude towards building relations with Russia. Back under Prime Minister Abe, we had a whole mechanism for our joint work, joint cooperation. We had plans to propel Japanese-Russian relations to a whole new level. I do hope this work is going to be continued in the same vein. Dear friends, President Putin has been answering our questions for 2.5 hours so far. To streamline our work, I would like to organize a blitz session, very short questions, not just what Madam Dargam said. And we have very short questions right now. And Ryan Chilka, please. Thank you, but not the machine gun. Well, that depends on how you're going to ask. The question about, yeah, we have that as well. The biggest foreign agent in Russia, the biggest dangerous, the pandemic that is still raging on, and Russia is one of the countries that has a low level of vaccination. So what is your attitude towards mandatory vaccination? How do you address this issue? I said on many occasions that our vaccination becomes mandatory should it make its way to the national calendar of vaccines. But vaccination against coronavirus has not been put on this national list. So in that sense, it's not mandatory. But as per the existing legislation, regional authorities have the right to introduce mandatory vaccination in view of the pandemic at the recommendation of chief sanitary doctors with regard to specific categories of citizens. And this is what happens. But it's not about the mandatory nature. I do not support the mandatory nature of vaccination, and here's why. Any decision that is obtruded on you from the outside, you can circumvent it, you can bypass, you can buy the certificate. Maybe sometimes it happens differently if you get a European vaccine. But, you know, I heard it said on many occasions there are citizens from European countries who come to Russia to get a jab of Sputnik, and in Europe they buy a certificate that they've got vaccinated with Pfizer. And, you know, this is what European doctors say. Because many still believe that Sputnik is more reliable and safer too. But, you know, I am not here for promoting Sputnik V. Any decisions imposed from outside can be bypassed very easily. You know, there are hundreds and thousands of people who think on drafting new laws, whereas millions of people think how to bypass those same laws. So what you need to do is not to impose this from outside. You've got to argue and persuade. You've got to show people that vaccination is better than having the disease. And this applies not just to Russia, but to other countries as well. There are just two scenarios for almost each and every person. You either contract the disease and suffer through it, or you get vaccinated, and you cannot get away from that. And you also need to increase greater trust among people for what the government is doing. You need to show concrete examples. You need to provide arguments. And I think I do hope we will succeed. Mr. Sajapur, please.
Question relates to Afghanistan. How you see the American defeat and withdrawal from Afghanistan in a broader strategic sense? Would it change U.S. global positioning, and what would impact on the realignment of forces that you talked about? Thank you.
First, What I'd like to say is, of course, the president of the US made the right call, the right decision to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan. He must have understood. Maybe he didn't know how exactly it would play out, but he understood that he would be subject to criticism internally. And yet he made the call, he made the decision, and he assumed the responsibility for that. Yes, we understand that maybe this decision could have been done differently, implemented differently, and this decision has an effect on how the U.S. is treated, is perceived, especially countries that perceive the U.S. as an ally. I think the tide will time and everything will get back to its circuits. I do not think there's going to be drastic changes, drastic shifts. Maybe in the short term, it's going to have an impact on the U.S. relations with its allies. But the attractiveness of a country does not depend on that alone. There are many factors. There is the military, the political cloud, military cloud, and economic heft. Alexander Rahr, please. Mr. President, when Chancellor Schröder and you spoke at the St. Petersburg German dialogue, you said that it was the best point in time in Russian-German relations over the last 100 years. Right now, the relations have soured. My question is as follows. Probably it's going to be Olaf Scholz that is going to be the new chancellor. Do you think you can resuscitate the relations? Maybe the St. Petersburg dialogue at least. You know, it's not only up to us. If the German side expresses interest, then we will intensify these ties. The St. Petersburg dialogue still exists. It didn't go anywhere. It's still held and organized. Of course, we could intensify mutual contacts between our societies, and these contacts can be more fruitful and productive too. We need to depoliticize everything, and I hope this is what's going to happen. The coalition in Germany is turning out to be quite complex. There are divergent political views espoused by the forces that might become part of this coalition. So we'll see how it's going to play out in practice, but we're willing to engage in dialogue. Whom else do I see? Anatol Lieven, please.
Lieven from the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. China and other countries have made a move to electric cars, a key part of their action against climate change. What are Russia's plans in this regard? Thank you.
Well, you know, I spoke on this subject on many occasions already. Yes, when the vehicles are moving in the city, they are one of the biggest polluters, the utilities, the cars, the industry. That's obvious. But globally, we should not forget where the power, the electricity itself comes from. Let us not try to mislead one another. E-vehicles are great. But atmospheric pollution, air pollution when power is generated, that's probably not that good. Coal-powered generation is widespread. Alexander just asked about Germany. You know, coal-power generation of electricity there is twice as big as in Russia. I think it's 30 or 32% or so. Whereas in Russia, coal is used just for 15% or so of the total of power generated. Yes, e-vehicles are good. And for such a country as Russia, which has big reservoirs of natural gas, I think, yes, we could also use gas as a motor fuel. We need to change the energy mix, greening it, based on the climate agenda, and then we will obtain the desirable result. And have you driven an electric car? Yeah, in Algarve. There is a difference or no? Yeah, I drive the car. No, I almost feel no difference. These are good cars. My eyesight is not that good. Constant tells it tooling. Mr. President, I'm the deputy from the city which we find ourselves in right now in the State Duma. Yeah, but you still have to say that. Yeah, I had to. I want to ask about history and about memory too. At the very beginning of our meeting, there was a lot of talk about Homo Sovieticus, and we have spoken about Soviet countries, post-Soviet space. I would like to say that on October the 2nd, there's going to be the 300th anniversary of the Russian Empire, and we also celebrated the 800th anniversary of Prince Alexander Nevsky, and you inaugurated the monument. It created a huge impression on people. But why is everything that is related to the 300th anniversary of the empire, why everything is held in secrecy? Are we ashamed of that? I think we shouldn't do that, because there is this continuity from Russia to Russian Empire to Soviet Union to Russia. Even though there are divergences and controversies, still there is continuity, and that is why we addressed you on that subject, and we sent a letter. Maybe we're going to miss the 2nd of November, but still, if you could participate, that's going to be good. I agree with you. Historic continuity is great for us to understand the way forward. And if we we didn't do everything we could, I apologize. We will organize events. Yuri Sloskin. I have a question about history too. You are at the helm of the Russian state for many years now, and you must have thought about your role in the Russian history. What do you think your major accomplishments are, and what are the biggest failures as the Russian leader? You know, I don't think about my role in history, because once you embark on that path, it's high time you quit. Because, it becomes a barrier, a hindrance. It impedes you from making the decisions. Whenever you start thinking, God forbid this happens or this happens, what will Mrs. Grundy say? And, that's the end of it. You've got to quit and abandon. You've got to resign. As far as my accomplishments go, we had 40 million people under the poverty line. Still, it's more than 19 million right now, but it's not 40 the way it used to be. I think this is the biggest accomplishment I can boast of. Our economy has recovered. Some industries, in particular the defense industry, were almost non-existent. Another moment and we would have lost them entirely. We wouldn't have been able to rebuild, because the supply chains and the scientific schools would have vanished entirely, and we've managed to rebuild all of that. Another thing, almost all Russian region, the charters and the constitutions of republics had different things, like, the right to print their own currency, state boundaries, but there was not a single mention that they were parts of the Russian Federation. That was a very serious challenge. We managed to overcome it all. Counterterrorism, fighting international terrorism too. I would like to say something I ruminate on, and I'll be completely frank with you. Yes, we've managed to overcome that difficult period, especially in the fight against terrorism. But to a large extent, not thanks to my efforts, thanks to the patience, courage, and will of the Russian people. And I say that absolutely sincerely, absolutely frankly. This is not a pose. I saw the suffering Russian families went through, but Russia endured. And this attests to the fact that this passionality we spoke about at the beginning is the core part of the Russian people. There is this internal incentive towards development. It exists, and it's extremely powerful. Mr. President, since you do not want to speak about your own role in history, let me have a look at it from a different angle. You know, it's become very fashionable to search for a vision of the future. The Valdai Club is searching for that. Mr. Bezrukov, sitting in the first row, does a lot to search for this image of the future. I'm afraid we won't be able to grasp this image because the world is incomprehensible. It's so big. Maybe I'm wrong. Do you have a vision for Russia, for the world? Something you would like yourself and your descendants see? You know, we could speak about that for a very long time. I think I responded to this question in different formats, and I would hate to simply repeat the responses that I gave back in the past. But let me start from, you know, the theme of this Valdai Forum, getting back to the future. No, it's the international shake-up. But not just that, the individual and values too. Yeah, there you go. But, you know, the individual, we always forget about that. We should keep that in mind because this is the most important thing. You know, I cited Nikolai Berdayev. As you know, he wrote a number of important treatises which are still popular until this very day. And he spoke about the contemporary medieval times. He spoke about freedom. He spoke about it being a heavy burden. But there's another thing that he said. He said that at the very center, the very heart of development, there should be the individual, because the individual is more important than society and the state, the government. So I would very much like, in future, for these resources of the state to be concentrated around the interests of the human being. This is something we should aspire to. How efficient we are in building such a system, so far it's hard to tell, but this is something we have to strive for. Yeah, let's ask questions from the boxes 1, 2, 3, and then, yeah, the young person there in the back. Raising the hand, yes. Thank you, Mr. President. Dmitry Suslov, Higher School of Economics. In your remarks today, you said that the controversies, both national and international, have reached a level that in the past, such level of tensions degenerated into world wars. So far, we cannot see a world war, at least a hot one. Do you miss that? That's what I wanted to ask. We are probably not seeing such a world war because there is nuclear weapons to take into account. But do you mean to say, do you think that in principle such a war is impossible? And if it were impossible, as you know, as Dostoevsky said, if there is no God, then everything is possible. If there is no danger of a world war, then there is complete irresponsibility. Like of any heat, there is no barrier in the way of aggressive politics. But if there is this danger of a world war, isn't it worth for Russia as a nuclear superpower, as a country that has survived gravest wars that you've spoken about today, a country that realizes the value of peace, which is also one of universal human values, isn't it worth for Russia to be more vociferous about saying that peace protection, peace strengthening is also part of your agenda and something you pursue? You know, we have been saying many positive, important things, but there are many things our partners choose to ignore completely. So, you know, there's no point in simply speaking. We need to obtain the results we strive for. That's difficult. This is something we're going to work on.
So you have said something about nuclear weapons. You know, nuclear powers bear big responsibility, and you have said that it is senseless to speak about World War III, but there is still a threat of a full mutual extermination. We should bear that in mind. And this sector, please. Tatiana Kostoeva, French International Human Rights Court. The question that France is very interested in. There has been reports about Russia's PMCs working and functioning in Mali. Does the actions taken by PMCs counter the general actions taken by Russia? Yes, this is something that we have spoken with President Macron about. You've mentioned PMCs. Actually, they do not reflect the interests of Russia. If there are somewhere, it is not that they're taking actions there on behalf of Russia. This is something connected with energy production, with gemstones or gold extraction. If the actions run counter the measures taken by Russia, we will respond to that, obviously. Thank you. Mr. President, first, thank you for giving an opportunity to have a discussion on many issues with you. I have a question about the Caucasus region. The problems there have not been solved yet. A truce has been introduced, but there are countries and brotherly republics together with Russia have come up with a 3+3 format, but Iran, Azerbaijan and Russia has established a format including North-South corridor. And unfortunately, we have seen terrorists becoming active in the Caucasus, and Russia's role is very important here, and Armenia and other countries can step in as well. Do you think we should initiate establishing another format that will be more efficient and will take into account the interests of the republics of the Southern Caucasus region and the regional actors as well? Well, thank you. First of all, I would like to give credit to the political wisdom of the President of Azerbaijan and Prime Minister of Armenia. And despite the fact that events were very tragic, they managed to cope up with that and make a very good political decision. There have been some grievances and claims against the leaders of these countries. There are always people who are not satisfied with the results, but you can always tell these people, well, just try to do it better. And President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan managed to stop the bloodshed. There's nothing more important than preserving people's lives. But moreover, conditions for the long-term settlement in the region should be established. And these conditions are possible only if the both sides adopt these agreements and view them as long-term agreements and value the advantages of the reconciliation of a peaceful coexistence. The communications with Nakhchivan are very important for Azerbaijan, and the country is interested in unblocking communication lines. This is one of the most important tasks set by Armenia to establish effective communications with the region and to bring normal life back. And Armenia is interested in that indeed. She's interested in resetting relations with Turkey. And in both cases, this should result in achieving the most important goal, which is ensuring peaceful coexistence of the two countries and creating conditions for the development of both countries. Is it possible? Yes, it is, and we have done what we could to stop the bloodshed there, and our peacekeepers have been fulfilling their duties there, and almost 50,000 refugees have come back home, and by and large we've managed to retain the status quo in the conflict area. There are no hostilities there. Unfortunately, there are some incidents claiming people's lives, but we cannot imagine things to be different under these circumstances, and without Russia's participation, nothing can be done on the border. We actually need no one here, and it is quite simple. The map is in the general staff of the Russian army, which showed the border between the Soviet republics. And we should draw upon these documents, look into them, and discuss things that needed to be sorted out. We should reach compromises on that so that both sides would agree upon. We should find a multilateral format. We have a Minsk group, and we work within this format with our partners. But the most important thing is to ensure security of the countries and establish good neighborly relations between them. But so far we have managed to achieve this goal, but we should look into the future, look what will come to pass next. And the agreement envisages the peacekeeping contingents staying there, but this is not the most important thing. We should restore relations between the two countries. We should wrap it up, I think. Igor Istomin, MGIMO University. In your remarks, you have said that reforming of international organizations may be an item on the agenda. What can you say about the Council of Europe and the OSCE and Russia's participation in these organizations?
Эти организации будут...
By and large, if these organizations will work on implementing the objectives for which they were established in the first place, well, this will make sense. The Council of Europe is the European affair, and the same is true for the OSCE. But if they will continue to lecture the new states established on the former post-Soviet space, they can hardly continue to exist like that. And if Russia stops participating, stops becoming part of these organizations, it will lead us nowhere. No one likes being lectured. We should take a broader look at those issues, including humanitarian issues, if we speak about the Council of Europe, or the security issues in Europe. by and large. So we are going to finish it here. Please, in the center. Thank you.
Athar Javed, Director General, Pakistan House, Islamabad. Actually, with all due respect, of course, the counter-terror campaign is very important internationally, and it will continue. My question to you is, Mr. President, is about the ongoing negotiation or talks in Pakistan, Iran, Russia, China, and of course, Pakistan facilitated this Doha process as well. In the wake of NATO failed completely on almost every misadventure they made, including Afghanistan. Of course, the mess is their responsibility. But if Taliban manages to prevent drug trade, secures territory against ISIS, and terminates all the infrastructure, what would be the reaction or response from Russia, China, and Pakistan? Of course, it's not about recognition only. It's, as you said very rightfully, that it is important to empower Taliban on the ground economically, so the continuity should avert any social chaos like doctors' salaries, or nurses, education, teachers, anything related to social and other factors and stresses. I think I would really appreciate if we could look also, if you could shed light on this one, that how important it is to again wrap the mess of NATO. But it is important for the region. That's why I think Russia and China should take the lead on this account as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, as far as this mess left by NATO is concerned, I suggest we shouldn't speak about that right now. Because I think everyone has already shed criticism on what the US did, and President Biden, and I have spoken on that. I think President Biden was right to make this decision when he decided to withdraw troops. But right now we've got to look into the future. You said they are the ones to leave this mess, so they shouldn't absolve themselves of responsibility. And they have many instruments at their disposal to have an influence on what's happening in Afghanistan. They, and Europe in particular, have financial instruments, and they, shouldn't, have a snobbish look at this territory as our European colleagues sometimes do, because they share some part of the responsibility for what transpired there. We've got to join efforts and help the people of Afghanistan. And we have to understand that we should not repeat the mistakes of the past. We should not try to impose on the people of Afghanistan what the Soviet Union tried to do, nor what the US tried to impose. I think the USSR had a better, a more balanced approach when it intervened in Afghanistan. And the regional powers, and Russia in particular, are interested in improving the situation, and Russia will do its part to make sure the situation normalizes. As we can see, Taliban is trying to fight extreme radicals whose terrorist aspirations leave no room for doubts. They try to fight ISIS in particular. We understand ISIS simply joined Taliban to achieve their short-term goals. Right now they're attacking Taliban themselves. And we also understand that inside Afghanistan, Taliban has to build bridges with all ethnic, religious groups, with all the political organizations, social organizations. But we need to start with the ethnic component. Taliban mostly consists of Pashto groups, but there are also Tajiks, from 40 to 47%, according to different assessments. That is a very big number. Besides, there are Uzbeks, Kazaris, and other ethnic groups too. So if you look at it from this point of view, yes, we know that there are representatives of these groups in the government, but not in the first row seat. And there are people who want to claim an active role in the new government system, and this balance has to be struck. We're not nudging them to do anything. We are just sharing with them a view from the outside. And we're in contact with everyone, with all the political forces that exist in Afghanistan, and we managed to foster quite stable relations with all of them. And we want there to be an acceptable compromise to be found. And we do not want issues that exist inside to be resolved with the force of arms. We want women's interests to be taken into account. Afghanistan needs to strive to be a modern state. And I believe that the role and significance of Pakistan in that sense is not inferior to those of China or Russia. That is why we are interested in developing cooperation with your country in particular in order to secure a joint result. Without a doubt, Russia's interest is to make sure that, in the end, Afghanistan exits from this never-ceasing civil war, and we want the people of this long-suffering nation to feel safe and secure within their national borders. We want the people of Afghanistan to have a chance to peace and prosperity, and we will do everything in our power to obtain this result. I believe, yes, Mr. President, thank you very much for this conversation. I will absolve you of the functions of the moderator because it's high time. Well, you know, I never laid a claim to your position, you know, in a preventative manner. I think we've had a very interesting discussion. We've covered almost all the subjects possible. A huge thank you. And throughout this discussion, I think we shouldn't haste to go to New York. I think next year Valdai Club is going to gather once again in Sochi. We hope that everything is going to be great. We'll see you in person, and we'll probably have a 5-hour discussion next time. Yes, thank you. You don't need to organize this concluding session in New York. You know, there's no irony to what I say. Many people interesting would be go to Afghanistan, to other countries. There is good grounds behind that, and in Europe too, to talk about the issues that Europe finds most relevant today. Well, we could talk about energy, climate issues. Why not? I know, yes, we hold events everywhere, and you could do that in New York too. Thank you. Are you laughing? You don't think that is important? I would like to thank you, colleagues. Indeed, for many years you've been coming to Russia, and you still demonstrate a great deal of interest in our country. That is a good opportunity for me, for my colleagues, because your humble servant speaks in this format. Our ministers come here as well. I know that our foreign minister spoke here. The mayor of Moscow, our capital, spoke here in the past. It gives us an opportunity to tell you what our view is of Russia's role in today's world, the direction we're moving in. I think this yields some very good practical results. You know, colleagues, our vice prime minister has just got back from the U.S., and he says that I was surprised, he says, when I spoke to the administration, to the security advisor, and I felt, he said, that there was some deficit of information. Maybe the CIA, they don't trust the CIA or something, I don't know. But such platforms are in high demand because they give us an opportunity to have a frank discussion, to speak to one another, to feel one another, and the decision makers at different levels will take into account, in particular, what we speak about at the Valdai Forum. Thanks a lot, and bye.